Welcome to the Karen Kenney Show.
Hey, okay. So before we dive deeper into this conversation with today's guest, Alesia Galati, I just wanted to put a little bit of it in context. So Alesia, as you're going to come to find out, she's the owner and founder of Galati Media, which is a podcast management company. And she really helps people to develop a signature kind of system for launching and managing podcasts. And she does it in such a way that, you don't have to worry about all the moving parts and bits. You know what I mean? She takes all the stress out of it so nothing falls through the cracks. And I wanted to have her on this show. Yes, because also I'm a person who has a podcast, right? 5 years, 260 some odd episodes and all that stuff. But it was really my interest in her origin story and the fact that she grew up in what she calls a cult. And I thought that it was so fascinating, the kind of the character arc and the story arc of where she began, and then how she started and got her first job to now being an entrepreneur and her own boss. And so in reference to this is a longer episode, and I wanted to take the time to have the full scope of the question, like the full scope of her experience, and to be able to ask all the different kind of questions that I had about her personal story and how it was informing the work that she does now. So if you're somebody who listens to this show, one of the questions I always ask when I have a guest is, this is great. Like, you're amazing. You're doing all this incredible work now, but I want to know like who you were and where you came from and what inspired this and what molded and shaped you, And so that's why I'm calling this episode Getting Out, Starting Out, and Standing Out. And it points to getting out of that cult and starting out on her own as a young woman, and what it was like to now be in the world after having been sheltered for so long, and starting out in her corporate career. And then now turning around and helping others to stand out. And I just thought it was really fantastic. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. Like I said, it is a longer episode, so you might have to take it in chunks or pieces. Do whatever works best for you. But just thank you so much for being here. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Alesia Galati. And if you're somebody who wants to start a podcast, hey, reach out to her. All of her social links and how you can get in touch with her will be on the episode and in the show notes. Thanks so much. Enjoy the show. Hey, you guys, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I am super duper excited today to have Alesia Galati on the show. And so we actually don't really know each other that well. So you guys, you've heard the intro. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her. She is the owner and founder of Galati Media, which basically I think of as like a podcast production company, but you do more than that. Like you do management, you do production, you help people to kind of grow and to really create a kick-ass podcast that kind of pulls listeners in before the thing even airs. So I want to dive into all of that. But first, let me just say, Alesia, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am so happy that we connected and I had you on my show. So people go listen to that because that is going to be great as well. But yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. And so you guys who listen, my loyal listeners, I only usually have people on. I rarely do guests, like maybe 10, sometimes 12 a year, like one a month, if that. And I reserve it for people that I either know and love, that I'm wicked curious about, who I think is doing work, good work in the world that I want more new people, to know about. And so basically that's it. And then our mutual friend, who I call Emmeline, so Emily Aborn, kept talking about this Alesia trick. And I'm like, who's this broad she keeps talking about? Like, who is she? And then I came to one of your little workshops. You did like a mini workshop thing, and I got to see you and your personality. And then I heard a little bit about your backstory, and I was like, okay, now I'm officially curious, and let's go. So here's the thing that I always like, to ask. So you guys heard the intro and, all the stuff that you've been listening to podcasts since I think you said like 2015.
Yeah.
But how you got here, like I'm fascinated about that journey. But before, do you know who Lisa Nichols is?
Don't think so.
Okay, so Lisa Nichols is I don't know what you would call a coach, a thought leader, whatever, but she's led the masses. Leading the masses is like one of her programs, right? She's an incredible speaker, she's an incredible storyteller. And she talks about how a lot of times when she goes out on stage and she gets introduced, and this happens to many of us who are speakers, they're not going to introduce you like, yeah, here's this chick that was like a total loser 10 years ago. Like, no. So what they always do is they start with your accomplishments. And so they're pumping you up and all the headlines, right? Sold this
Mm-hmm.
many books, did this many things, da, 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 da. And I always think that's great. Like, we want to know why you're the one we're listening to on stage, or in our case, as podcasters, why am I listening to your show? Like, why are you the one with the mic, right? But for me, I love that trajectory. Like, I love hearing where they are, but I love knowing where people came from. And so one
Yeah.
of the questions I always like to ask my guests is, so this work that you do now, and we can talk a little bit about that first, but I also want to dive into who you were in your childhood. And I always have a sneaking suspicion that the work that people do now as adults always links back to some shit that was going down in their childhood. So I want to kind of take that. But before we do, tell me about your business, like, and kind of how you help people in your own words. Because I know, like, these days, what are there? 3 million, 3+ million? How many podcasts are there now?
Anywhere from 3 to 5 million if you're looking at Spotify versus Apple Podcasts. So Apple Podcast says there's around 3 million, and then Spotify says there's around 5 million. But one thing to remember as you're considering, oh, wow, that sounds like podcasting is saturated. It's actually not. There's more YouTube channels and there's more blogs out there than there are podcasts. But even beyond that, only 400,000 are active of
Yes.
those millions. So that's why I love the medium. I think it's just such an impactful way to get your voice out there without having that, so often, especially as a woman of color, right? Like, there's that bias that can come in. Whereas if someone just hears your voice and your message, they don't care what you look like. They don't care, how old you are. And none of those biases come in. And I think that's what makes podcasting so impactful and why I am so passionate about it.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of bypasses the gatekeepers. It's like if you can
Yeah.
get a mic or even just use your phone. I mean, depending on how technical you want your podcast to be. Like, you and I both, I think, are fans of quality sound, and we can talk
Yeah.
about that. But I think literally, like, just about so, and I want to get into some of these deeper questions about podcasting too. But since you brought it up, let's just discuss this for a bit, and then I want to hear about how, like, you help people in Galati Media. But and then we'll get to the origin story and all that stuff. So there is 3 to 5 million podcasts out there, but only, like, it's a wicked small percentage of people that actually stay consistent. Like you said, 400,000 of those are active. And it's like in Apple learned, right? Apple learned right away. That's why you can't upload and start your podcast on Apple until you have at least 3, maybe now it's 5, but at least 3 episodes in the can, because they know a lot of people will post one and then they stop, or they post 3
Yeah.
and then they stop, or they post 5 or whatever. So people who are like hanging in there, like, I'm going on 5 years now. This is my 5-year anniversary so March, probably 2024, this will air. So some of us have been like sticking around and doing it, but a lot of people start and then they stop. So I agree with you, loyal listener. If you've been thinking like, maybe I want to start a podcast or do something, a YouTube channel, whatever, get your voice out there. Don't let the numbers scare you or fool you, because a lot of people don't stick with it.
Yeah, which is frustrating, but
Right.
that's kind of where we help, right? So to jump into what we do,
Yeah.
when I started Galati Media, I'm very multi-passionate, right? And so I've been in the online space for a long time. I have a degree in marketing and business management, and a lifelong learner, just love learning anything and everything that I possibly can. So I'd been doing a lot of blog writing, SEO, content writing, content marketing, all of that stuff, and then dived into podcasting and editing and thought, how can I make the bearer make it easier for someone to launch a podcast. If they're scared of the tech, if they're scared of the marketing, if they're scared of all those things, and they maybe have a million other things that they're fantastic at, how can I stand behind that person, lift and help them push their message out? And I thought, okay, the easiest way to do that, that's different than what everybody else is doing, is to do full service podcast management, which means our clients record, drop it into a folder, and then we do the rest. That is it, right? So like the editing, the show notes, uploading it to the podcast hosting platform, the graphics, posting it on social media,
Show
literally
notes.
everything. Yes, that would go into it. We do all of it so that all they have to do is show up in their awesomeness for the interview or for that episode, and then move on to do more of what they love to do, because it takes a lot of time and effort to actually get your podcast out there and do everything from the editing. Even if you're doing minimal editing, it still takes time.
Sure.
And then into the show notes and the all those other things that you got to do. It's just, it ends up being a lot of effort. So how could we support them? And then I was like, all right, this is the way to do it. And I knew that I needed to grow my team, because there's no way that I can spend all that time doing these episodes. We focus really heavily on the content within the episodes, which makes us different too. So often a podcast producer, usually the host has to direct them on what to take out or what to leave in. They'll give them timestamps or examples, and generally they'll edit out false starts, etc. Whereas we will actually take it a step further. And if a guest says a joke that lands wrong, or maybe says something that goes against the values of the host, especially around election years, that's a big one, we will actually take that out, because it doesn't align. And we want to make sure that what goes out to the listener is going to keep their attention and is going to express the values of the host. So we take it a step even further than that and really go deep in the editing.
Yeah, I saw that on your media page, and I want to talk about I want to talk about the editing process and stuff like that. But I saw that you said that you're about, now I know I'm sure you can, I'm curious to how you relate this with other people, but for yourself, right? Like I can say like, hey, I run a values-driven company, meaning, so, and I teach as a spiritual mentor, right? One of the things that I work with people about is like, what are your core values? Like what really matters to you? And whether it's integrity or communication or family or making money or like whatever, right? I'm not here to judge what those are, but knowing what those are a really, big deal. So you say something like, look, I want to just read it right here. You said something like, no, actually, you know what? It was on your website where you said, values-driven businesses, helping you either cultivate or create or whatever, which I'm sure is going to be reflected in their podcast. But what does that mean to you, and why does it matter to you? Because again, I have a sneaking suspicion, like it's so fascinating knowing, like, I do my research. Like I'm like, oh, I'm talking to somebody, I'm going to find out some stuff, right? So knowing about your childhood and I'll just, say growing up in a cult and these different things, I feel like a lot of the things that also drive you now, I'm sure as a mom, as a parent, like in relationships and business, whatever, come from these things, right, that you experience, or the lack of freedom in certain things. So when you say, tell me why it's so important to you though, like that do you like to work with people who are value driven?
Yeah. So when I knew that I wanted to have a team, one of my values was paying. So these are my core values, right? Is paying myself a living wage, because I am the sole financial provider for my family. My husband is a stay-at-home dad and he homeschools our kids. He does not work. Second, paying my team a living wage. That is important to me, right? To be able to teach them everything they need to know, to be able to do the work to the full extent of, I'm very type A, so like what I would expect myself to create.
So your quality, your level of expectation or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And then to be able to be the driving force behind messages that make a difference. And so our clients tend to be people who are, whether it's a boundaries coach, all the way up to women, a nonprofit that is getting women on board seats. Like those are the types of people that we're working with, where they are making a difference with their message, with their like empowering other people to stand up and take action and like own their life. Like that is what I love.
Right. Which is all like, again, it's all pointing back to
It
like
is,
so much
yeah.
stuff. So we're not going to have to, we get to, but I want to dive into it because so many of the questions that I want to ask you beyond like, it's interesting, I always think, to know what people do, but I really love knowing why they do what they do. Like that human behavior thing is something that, like you said, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm wicked curious. I love to know why we do what we do, say what we say, think what we think, believe what we believe, and the stories that we tell, which
Yeah.
I think with you, right, like it really kind of goes back. And you had said, and that's why, like, so let's just go there. Like, let's just talk about your younger years so that all the questions I'm going to ask you make sense as to why I'm asking them, because you were just talking about the kinds of people you like to work with. And I want to see if there's connections there. So
Yeah.
I know that, so you've had a couple of podcasts, right? So you had your professional one, right? It's Listeners to Leads, correct?
Yep.
All right. And then you had this other podcast, which seems like you're not doing episodes anymore. I think your last one was in April of 2021, right? So you and your sister, Jada, had a podcast called Two Sisters in a Cult. So you're the oldest sister. And my understanding is like you, like me, have these, you have like, I don't use half siblings or half brothers either. We just say brother, sister, whatever.
Yeah.
But just for the crowd, right? So she is your half sister. So same dad, different moms, right?
No, same
I mean,
mom.
same mom. Sorry, same
Mhm.
mom. Sorry, because you said sister from a different mister. Okay.
Yeah.
So same mom, different dads. Your mom is white. Your
Mhm.
dad was black.
Mhm.
Her dad was black as well. Mixed.
Yes, her
She's
dad,
mixed.
it was Jamaican and Native American.
Okay. So
And our
you're
mom is white and Puerto Rican, so
okay.
Italian and Hispanic.
Hispanic, right? Okay. So you have these two mixed girls, your mom, and I don't want to tell the story for you, but just to kind of get us in context. So your mom, it sounds like she had some generational trauma. She had some things that went on, and she had substance use disorder. So she had some addictions, right? Drugs
Yep.
and stuff like that. And I think you also mentioned, and correct me if my memory fails me, but I think you also mentioned that she struggled with depression and anxiety. Like there was a lot of stuff going on there.
Mhm.
And but to her credit, you said she was always trying to be better and to do better, and especially for her children. And I think
Yeah.
you mentioned that, um, and I know because I've had a lot of friends in programs and stuff like that. And I say it with my own clients too. Like if you're coming here, uh, to lack of a better word, like, so let's just say in a 12-step program, they'd say, if you're not here getting sober for yourself, you're fucked, because doing it for other people isn't like what's going to
Yeah.
make it last or whatever. But your mom really wanted to try, it sounds like, and be a better mom. And then you had an aunt and uncle, so who fundamentalist Christian, and then it leads to this thing, and I just find the whole thing fast. I have so many questions, so I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you can share whatever you want to share about your childhood and what kind of went down, because I think so much of it leads to the human being and the business owner that you are now. So do you mind just like jumping in, or if you
Yeah.
need more direction, I'm happy to ask
No.
questions. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. Okay, so like you said, my mom was an addict for the majority of especially my childhood. When I was 11, we moved from New York, born in Syracuse, from New York to New Jersey, and went to a women's program that was supposed to be a year long, right? Fundamentalist Christian aunt and uncle were really pushing for her to go to this program. She went by herself at first to try to get clean. She was there for about 3 months before we ended up joining her there because she realized, oh, wait, I can bring my kids here. During that time, we were actually living with a family friend. Like they went to the church. It was one of the only ways that we were able to stay going to the private school that we were going to at the time. Was if it was, I would say that church was a cult in and of itself. Right? Like very, like we are the only ones who know what the truth is. You can only go to
Yeah.
our church. If you go to other churches, they're not going to have the full message. It was very much like that. And a lot of the people there put their kids in the associated private school, which is where we went. So I
Okay.
never
So
went to public school or anything like that.
Okay, so I'm being rude and interrupting, but on purpose, because I want to back it up even a little bit more, because we're starting at 11, right? But so you have these other siblings. And so I'm like, there were other relationships and stuff going on. So how long was your biological father like in the picture? Like if you feel comfortable, where was he during all this? And because I noticed that, like, again, like a lot of times people will say to me, oh, you talk about your mother a lot, but you almost never mention like these father figures or these people in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, like where
Yeah.
was dad during, I'm doing air quotes in case, but where was he during? Because I think that's a name that you earn.
Yeah.
Biological father is a fact, right? It is what it is, but
Yep.
dad is a name that you earn. So, but where was your biological father during all this?
So my mom was 16 when she got pregnant with me. My dad is 10 years older than her. She had run away to New York City at the time, ended up coming back to Syracuse, was going to sign up to go back to school and to finish high school. And she lost her bus token, she said. And then my dad pulled up and said, "Hey, do you need a ride?" So a couple months later, I was born.
Okay, so this is what I find it's so fascinating, right? Because if we skip that part of the story, which starts with a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old, it's like, hello, hello. So, I often, when I speak about my own story, I'm writing a memoir, and I'll often say, like, we were highly unsupervised as children because your mother was probably, she's no longer with us, right?
Correct.
She
Yeah.
has passed. So how old though would she be now? If she was still with us?
So she would be 40. How old am I? One second.
Yeah, no, right. No,
She
yeah,
would be
roughly.
48 because
Yeah,
I'm
so she's
32. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm 55, right? So your mother was like, we were the latchkey kids. There was nobody keeping an eye on us. So this is how these things can happen because she's 16. She somehow like takes off. Something was going on. Something was going on. And then she hooks up with your father. So now we have the beginning. We have babies having babies. We're
Mm-hmm.
already off. We're already off to an extra wicked hard start. You know what I mean? So that relationship, it sounds like, did not last. But what happened in that? Was she already dabbling in narcotics and stuff like that? I don't want to. Did he
Mm-hmm.
introduce, like, what happened where that, the trauma was like, hey, I probably don't want to feel these things. And so she sought ways, I'm assuming, to not feel the way that she felt. I don't want to put words in her mouth,
Right.
but what do you think went down?
So it's my understanding that her drug use started in her teen years, like mid, like
Yeah.
13, 14 kind
Yeah.
of age range, after some sexual assault stuff that had happened
Yeah.
to her
Yeah.
from a friend of the family.
Ugh.
And when that was tried to be addressed, it took the adult side rather than her side.
Oh,
And
God.
so there was a lot of trauma there with that.
Yes. Yes.
For like, so she was with my dad after I was born. I'm the oldest of five. None of my siblings have the same dad as me. But after I was born, I want to say I was 2 or 3 months old, and he was very drunk and was coming after her with a knife. So she left, and then came back with the cops to get me because she knew that he wouldn't hurt me. Um, he was always I mean, as good as a person that has issues can
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
he wasn't a bad dad. Most of my childhood up until we left was dual custody, me having, seeing him on the weekends, but them always fighting about
Sure.
custody and always fighting and arguing and him and them using me in the middle. And I hated that so much.
Yeah.
Um, but one thing I would say is that my mom never said anything bad about him. Like never. It was always like, put your dad on the phone, or like it was always him saying bad things about her. She never would tell me any of the things that he would do until I was a lot older.
Sure.
Um, as for like the storyline for him, then when I was 14, he got locked up for manslaughter, hurt somebody or killed somebody over drug money owed to him. And so he was in jail up until, and I did not have any contact with him from 11 until I was 19.
Mm.
And I was living in New York City. And I decided to give it a shot and just send letters to where he was in jail. Um, that got, I don't know if the word weird is the right word, uncomfortable really quickly, because he had so many expectations of what he wanted our relationship to be. But I was like, whoa, slow down.
Like
Like,
you knew you wanted contact. You knew you wanted something, whether it's you wanted a full-blown relationship, whatever, but some part of you, because we have multiple parts inside of us, but some
yeah.
part of you was curious and interested. And then it was like his idea or agenda or whatever it was, right? Was not was not matching. And it was like, okay. Because it was probably your nervous system probably was like, this does not feel safe. Because even
Hmm.
though he was your father, like you didn't really know him. And the
Right.
circumstances were extreme. That's a lot. That's a lot. As the kid of a murdered mother, like I can understand that there was a lot of I mean, there's so many layers to that kind of trauma and stuff like that. So he wants to come back into your life. You're like pumping the brakes. You're like, yeah, I'm not sure. And so then, yeah, I can see your face. Like if you were,
Yeah.
listeners, if you were watching this on YouTube instead of listening to the show, if you're watching the show, you can see Alesia makes these great faces when she's making a point or something. So highlighting something, beautiful eyes. She's like, "Wah." So okay, so you tell like you're like, Dad, I'm not so sure, and then like what happens?
Yeah. So from there, kind of very loose touch between us. And then after I had my first kid, so this would have been post 2014, did visit him once in person. And then he started posting some things online. And this was after my mom had gotten back child support from him, and he was angry.
So wait,
And
he
so,
got out of jail then. I mean, he's not
yes.
floating on the internet. So he got out at some point.
He got out,
Yeah.
yes. So that would have been 2011, 2012. He got out. I visited him once or twice and then had my oldest and then visited one more time. And then after that, my mom had gotten the court-ordered back child support for me.
Mm.
And she was like, "Well, do you want it?" I was like, I don't need it. You take it, whatever. Like, I don't really care. And so he pretty much went on social media and went off in
Oh,
his anger about my mom and his anger about me. And I was just like, yeah, I don't really need that in my life. And so I had
sure.
to really put up some boundaries and say, I don't want contact with you. Which was really unfortunate because I love that side of the family. Like I remember my cousins and I remember my grandmother and I remember my auntie and I remember like the black
Mm.
side of my family and being able to have those interactions. And I don't really have as many memories with them as I do with the Puerto Rican and Italian side. And I really cherished those memories, but it kind of spoiled things there. And then he passed away last year due
Oh,
to cancer.
I'm
And
sorry.
so thank you, when his cancer came back, I want to say it was 2022, 2021, he first got cancer and he wanted to get in touch and he wanted to kind of mend things. And I was like, that's cool. Also, like that's for you. That's not for me. We can try, but it's going to be slow going and don't expect things to like change very much. Um, and then we maybe chatted a few times before he passed away. Um, and that relationship was so complicated
Complicated. I get it.
that like even when he passed, yes, I was sad, but I mean, I'm his only kid. Yes, I had to go and handle things, but it's like I didn't really feel
So you were kind of
much of
doing it from
anything.
like, yeah, you were kind of doing it from a little bit more of this removed place because you guys didn't really have a chance to, it sounds like really truly know one another. And that's a very complicated, that's its own form of stuff. My sweetie and I talk about this all the time. Like, when the mother is kind of like the headline story or whatever in your life, because you had so
Hmm.
much time and history with your mother. And then to have these peripheral men, it's like those roles that they did or didn't play. And then it's like, what am I like, I have a biological father and a stepfather, and they're both, one is 80 and one's bumping up against that age. And I'm just thinking like, it's going to be like, again, I always say when people say like, you don't talk about them much, I always say it's complicated. It's very complex. Those relationships are very complex. So my heart goes out to you because, sometimes we're not just grieving the shit show that things were. We're grieving what we never had and we wish that we had, you know what I mean? And we wish it was different. And because you didn't just lose your dad, you lost your whole, the whole, like as you said, the black side of your family, all this culture and history and the stories and the characters, the cast of characters that we have in families, right? Like your uncles and your aunties or your cousins or whatever. And it's like to you, you have other siblings, but to him, you were an only child. And so it's like you were his extension of his bloodline in the family. So I feel like there's probably, and I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you, but I imagine that there's maybe it's not unresolved. Maybe you've just neatly packaged it up and you have made peace with it. But I feel like, especially as the mom of two young boys, like, it would have been, I imagine it would have been somewhere in the storyline or in the thought is it would be nice for my boys to know their grandfather. It would have been nice if he had been more, I don't know, available maybe is the word. Or
Yeah. So I think,
how do you feel about
this is something, it's very interesting because like my youngest had never met my mom. And he was born in 2017 and she passed away in 2019. So he was alive for 2 years and never met her because I had to put up boundaries around her addiction. And I said, I don't want my kids to have to go through what I went through. I don't want them to have a grandmother who's in and out of a clear mental state.
Sure.
Like that is, oh, is grandma okay today? Like, I don't want my kids to have to worry about that.
Absolutely.
So no, I can't do that. And like I had to set very clear boundaries with that. And
Did
so
you set them also with your father? Did he ever get to meet your children?
he met the youngest one or the oldest one once when he was very little. And then after all that stuff went down, I said, you're not, no, absolutely not.
Okay.
There was a lot of like, not really, like, I don't think I ever really felt like, oh, I wish they would have had. It was like, this is the family we've been given, right?
Right.
And we get to choose whether they're in our life or not because they're toxic people and what they have to offer is not going to help my kids in any way, shape, or form. And so I have to create boundaries. And it was so much easier for me to do that as a mom than before I became a mom, right? Like before it's like, oh,
yes,
fine, okay, sure, I'll come visit, even though it makes me uncomfortable or whatever. But once my kids came, it was like, nope, absolutely not.
So I'm so fascinated by all of this because I think, again, I go back to, you and your sister had this podcast, Two Sisters in a Cult, for like, I think you did 30 episodes total or something like that. And like December 2020, I think you guys got your first piece of, you're like, oh, one of our listeners is writing to us. They sent you an email and it was like hate mail. And then it was like a pause. And then you did like one episode in January. And then 4 months later, you did a catch up and then you didn't do anything after that. But listening to the episode where you guys were, after, I think it took you a year to finally tell your own cult experience. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make my point here, but I think I remember you saying in that episode, so much happens when you're in a cult-like atmosphere, which is so much of it is so much of your power and your agency, authority, and autonomy is taking away from you. And what any cult and sometimes religions do, and I was just guest teaching in a friend's group last night, talking about the difference between religion and spirituality. And I was saying, like, so much of religion or these cult-like situations is that they keep the authority and the power outside of you. They're never instilling what I call internal resources so that you come to trust yourself, know yourself, believe that you make good decisions, know how to have boundaries, know how to say fucking no.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember you saying to your sister that it took you some time. And again, correct me if my memory's squirrely, right? But I remember you saying something to your sister like, I still have, now remember, this was in 2021. You probably have changed a lot in 3 years, but back in 2021, you said something like, I still have a hard time cutting people out of my life that like maybe shouldn't be in my life. It was hard for you to do that. So I think it's fascinating that now, again, I'm going to ask you a question and you can say like, don't want to answer or you're wrong, lady. But do you think that, how do I say this? If you weren't a mom, do you think that you've gathered the tools and the resources and the stuff now, the work that you've done on yourself now, to take a stand for yourself, even if you didn't have kids? Like your kids give you more of that kind of like fierceness.
Mm-hmm.
But would you advocate for the younger parts of you at this point, do you think?
I think that having kids pushed me to address a lot of these things so much quicker than I would if I hadn't had kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I would be, thinking about something, I would think, is that my thought or is that somebody else's thought? So there was a lot of inner work that happened in my 20s of like figuring it out, especially as a parent and wanting to like, I feel like being a parent made me address them a lot quicker. Be like, okay, we're about to do this thing with our kid. Why is this bringing up this thought? Okay, that's interesting. Not my original thoughts. That's somebody else's. How do I feel about this? Right. So there was so much of that happened in my 20s that I don't really know would have happened if I had been by my like living my own life, right?
Yes.
Um, yeah. So,
All right, so let's go to this. So you got this fundamentalist Christian aunt and uncle. They're encouraging your mother to go into this program. She goes for 3 months. You're living with the family friends. And then this is one of those interesting programs. Like I think you said it started in 1991, run by this woman and her husband. And he kind of handled the business and collecting the dough. And she handled the quote unquote leadership, which is really
yeah.
like the cultish shit. And so, but this is one of the few programs that allowed the women to bring their kids with them. So you get there at 10. No, you get there at 11, right? You're 11 years old and you're supposedly supposed to stay for 18 months. Now, some families, it sounds like some women would extend their stay to 2 years. But you guys set up camp and you're there for like 10 years. So I'm thinking to myself,
Yeah.
from 11 to 21, you
Mhm.
are at quote unquote the camp and under the guise of like it's helping these women, it's helping them, it's also quote unquote sheltering them from making bad decisions and not having contact with their drug dealers or these suspicious characters or men or all this stuff. But really, it's supposedly under the guise of helping people. But all the elements of cult are screaming through this place.
Yeah.
So can you just give us like a little bit of you? I was howling. In fact, it was so good. I had to write it down. I wrote it down. The welcome song.
Oh man.
All right, dear listener, listen. They had this welcome song. Now, what's so funny is at first I thought your sister said the welcome sign. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go. I need a picture of this welcome sign. And then I realized you're saying welcome song. And I'm like, oh my God. And you're like, Jada, do you remember the song? And she's like, oh my God. And then you just start howling, laughing. And you're like, Jesus Christ, this song. So basically the song is like, whatever your name is. And then after that, it's like, Jesus loves you. And then whatever your name is, Jesus cares. And then whatever your name is, has a plan for your life. And you'll know that he'll always be there because he's sovereign. And then the jazz hands and the wiggly fingers, like they were
Spirit
shooting. Okay.
fingers, yes.
And I just feel like I'm 11-year-old kid. I'm away from anything that's like familiar. And you have these weirdos, these strangers who are waggling their fingers while singing the Jesus song at you. And it's like, what the fuck is happening? But how conflicting it is because you say, but they were giving us 3 square meals a day. There was a little, I'll call it a consignment shop on campus is how I thought of it, right? Where you could go in and get some clothes. So you're getting this security, you're getting your bare essentials met, which feels new to your nervous system, but you also have all this weird shit going on. So tell me what that's like as an 11-year-old mixed race girl out in the middle of nowhere in New Jersey with all these weirdos. And you're like, what is happening?
So I think one thing that really helped set this up is that having grown up in that church beforehand, which already had some like very controlling elements to it, and like not going to public school, only going to that private school, only interacting with kids from that private school, not interacting with people outside of the church, that made it not as weird for me to go to the camp. Um, One thing that, I mean, I'm the oldest of five, so I saw my mom at her worst. I saw her, I remember very clearly saying, Mom, we have no food. Why are you giving money to people?
Mm,
Like at
mm,
9, like saying that
mm.
and being like, we don't have any food. We're literally eating jelly sandwiches with government cheese. And like, we don't have any food. The fridge is empty. Why are you handing money out to people? And so the idea of 3 square meals a day that we didn't have to scrimp and save and
Mm,
try to figure out was like so freeing, which is stressful, right? For an 11-year-old who's coming in
sure.
as the oldest and has pretty much raised the younger ones because the mom has an addiction. And my like I was always the second mom, and
Yeah.
especially to my kids during those, or not my kids, my siblings during those like
Yeah, you see
very
how that just
fundamental, yeah, fundamental years. And so like I remember even when I was 14, 15, and we were still at the camp and my mom would say, "Oh, go be a kid, go have fun." And I'm like, I've never
you,
had that chance. That's never and I would tell her. Of course I'd get in trouble for it, but like you took that childhood away. I don't have a childhood. It's always been moved to adulthood and having to mature very quickly to take care of these siblings because you weren't doing it and now you want to come in and do it all of a sudden? Like
are
no.
all five kids at the camp with you? Are all five of you there? And
Yeah.
what's the age range? You're 11. What is the baby? What's the youngest?
One.
So you have a 1-year-old and an 11, like that range, right? And
Mhm.
so, because I know you mentioned this Jada, but you have a brother, but
Three
how
brothers.
three brothers and you and your sister Jada.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're all now, I heard a little bit on the episode that you did about your own experience, but just like what is like the living situation like? Like your sister did the breakdown of like daily devotionals and then church 3 times on Sunday and like having to take your 5 minute. I was howling at your 5 minute showers,
I
and now
still take quick showers. My
your
my
three
husband
song
makes so
your
much
three
fun of me.
song minimum, like now you make yourself
Yep.
stay in like a little bit longer. But so I'm listening to all of this, but I'm thinking, I was really curious, like, is it literally like a camp where there's like little bunkhouses? Like, did you guys have your own, like, was it one big room or you were in dorms? Like, what was it like in the living space? Like, what was your reality like about, because then we're talking about privacy, sharing space, things being monitored. Like, what was it like?
So you've got the bottom floor, which is the cafeteria area. It's all chairs and tables and the kitchen. The second floor is the group bathroom. So it has about 8 stalls of toilets with doors and 8 stalls of showers with doors. And I want to say 5 sinks. And then off of there is a smaller bedroom with there's like it's like a bedroom and then it goes into another room. And there's 4 bunk beds in there. Across the hall, you've got 2 bigger rooms with another 3 bunk beds in there. Then if you keep going toward the end of this is a big building. Like you're
Yeah.
thinking lodge style, like they called it the lodge. That was that's what we called it. So it's a big building. At the end of that, you have the staff area, which is locked at all times because that's where they keep the medications,
Mm.
as well as the mouthwash.
Because of the alcohol, right?
Yes.
Content, I'm assuming.
Yep. And those were the staff rooms. So there were maybe 3 or 4 bedrooms in there that were one-off bedrooms with where the staff would sleep. And then you go up the stairs and you've got 2 massive rooms with any 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to say they had 5 bunk beds each. And then there was a smaller room that had 2 or 3 bunk beds. And then you go up the stairs and it's all tables and chairs, think like studying area kind of thing, with a more of a triangular
because you
roof.
guys were homeschooled, so it's like all kinds of stuff. So how many women are staying, you think? Because I know you and your sister said over your time there was like this regular group of like maybe 10 to 15 kids that were always around, but then about 50 kids cycled through there. So people either left their 18 months early or they stayed later.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys stayed for a wicked long time.
Yeah.
But like how many families are probably staying there at a time? Like how many moms?
I
Roughly.
would say anywhere from 8 to 10.
Yeah. Okay.
And they
So,
usually have 2 or 3 kids each.
wow. Okay. So I think what I find so fascinating about all of this is like when you're in a situation like that, I always say to people, like, I would suck at being in the military because I don't like anybody telling me what to do. And it's the same thing like with, I'm a spiritual mentor, but I always say like I'm a spiritual mutt. I'm like a free agent. Like I don't try to shove Jesus in any box. I don't try to I'm like, you know what I mean? I've kind of created my own relationship to the divine is how I do things. And that's how I like to empower people. But it sounds like in this situation, there was no empowerment going on. There was no trying to teach you how to better your life so you could get the out of there. It just sounds like it was a codependency kind of a plan. And like, again, and who knows what they were getting from the government or not, or what was really going on, how they made their money or whatever. But I feel like so much of it did not encourage critical thinking or independent thinking. It was very much like, I'm not going to say it was brainwashy because I wasn't there. I don't want to put words in the mouth, but it was like, it was not empowering these women. Like it might have stopped them from quote unquote doing bad habits or doing these things. But, addictions in their own way are habitual. They become habits. But what they're trying to do is to stop feeling the shitty things that they were feeling. And if you're not giving people tools to learn how to navigate their trauma, their feelings, to be able to sit with discomfort, to like all these things, I'm just thinking, so like, I'm like, were you just like prisoners? Like it feels, I'm like, were you guys just kind of held there? And like, that sounds extreme. I'm sure you could leave when you wanted to, but I don't think it feels to me from the very little that I know that it didn't feel like they were encouraging growth so that you could actually not need them. Is that accurate or
Right.
no?
That is accurate. I think about it a lot, and I think this is like the easiest way for people to understand. It's like when people go to prison. Now, this is a very broad term, right? And broad idea. People go to prison, they get out, and then they can't stand being out because they have to make choices for themselves and they have to make decisions and do things and figure out life, right? And so they get themselves back in because they'd rather be there. And that's exactly because it's when you're not dealing with the real issues and the real problems and the what's actually happening.
Yes.
And instead you're saying, you're a sinner. You are not capable of making good choices. Look where it got you. We are the only ones who know how to help you. Look, you've been clean for X amount of time. Uh, like that does not empower people to do or be better. It's just that they stay there because it's easier.
Well, right. Your example is so powerful because so I think of everything so much as we're not just dealing with people in their past and their parts, we're dealing with nervous systems, right? So what people are guaranteed, and this is what you're saying, they get out of prison, but all the decisions were made to them when they got up, what they ate, what they wore, pretty much what block you're in, who you have access to, like all these things. So all day long, it's just like, you're just following. You're just doing there. It's not like, hey, we're going to teach you how to like get a library card. We're going to teach you how to balance it. We're going to teach you so that when you get out of here, both you, your brain, your mind, your body, your nervous system can navigate this human experience. And it sounds like that's what, and the reason why I'm so happy we're talking about all of this is because now it's going to, in a moment, all my questions now are going to make more sense about why I think you like to work with who you work with, why you do what you do. But I know there's a next phase of this, but I want to go back to one of the things that made me most sad is that I believe probably, I can't speak for all of them. Obviously, I didn't know any of them, but in my heart of hearts, I like to believe that these women thought that they were doing what was best for their children. I mean, again, I don't know, but I would like to believe that. And because I'm like sucker for people trying to be better than they have been.
Yeah.
But there was a lack of self-trust. They were not, because people who trust themselves ask questions. People who have independent thinking will push back. They will question authority. They'll say, well, why are you having me do this? This doesn't seem to make any sense. You're not equipping me to not need you anymore. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's all kind of, it's just like trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. It's just like this awful cycle. But then you young lady, start to make some decisions, because you leave at 21. I don't know exactly where you go, although I do know you said you went to, I don't know, like, how did we end up in Bible college? Like, what the hell? So let's go there now. So now you're out of the camp. Do they make you go there? Did you choose to go there? Like, how does that work?
Okay. So I didn't really see the camp as a cult until this point.
Okay.
This was kind of the moment where I was like, what? Wait, what? What is happening?
No, wait, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Is it because you're now being exposed to other thinking? Like, has your window broadened? Are you interacting with people, and because of what they're saying, like, what's making you start to now think like, hey, that's a little suspicious? What was the thing where you kind of broke through and started to looking at it differently? Was it a specific person, teacher, book? Like, what happened?
What it was that I was graduating and I wanted to go to a Bible, like just a regular college that was accredited, probably a Christian college, since that's how I grew up. Like, I was fine with religion. And I wanted to go to a regular college. And they said, if you go to a regular college, you will not have a home to come back to.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm the oldest of 5 kids. You're
That's
telling me I
so
can,
Christian of them.
I know, you're telling me I can never see my family again, pretty much, if they stay here.
Oh,
I have no skills because I haven't been taught to do anything. I can't drive a car. I have a bank account with maybe like $25 in it. I don't have any life skills. I don't have any conversational skills. I have no skills whatsoever. And so I was like, well, I'll either go into the military or I'll go to a Bible college, like an accredited Bible college, where I can go and like I still love Jesus. I'm gonna keep moving. Like,
okay. And I think this is important too, because now we're in like a little more freedom mode, right? The leash has been extended in a way, right? So it's like, now what? But up until this point, so I know you're married to a man, you're married to your sweetie Chris. But up until this point, there's no boyfriend experience either, is there? So you're
no.
just like, you are now, how far away from camp is the college, first of all?
2.5 hours.
Okay, so enough distance that you're like away, but like you're thrown into like, I don't know, like, I don't know. All right, keep going. So, but I think it's important. Like, you are so, in some ways, wicked, what I would call like, I sometimes say I wasn't always, I mean, I wasn't a dummy, but I say I wasn't always super book smart. Like, I have friends who were like chemistry out, like all of that. They were like book smart. But I was a little more street smart. So it sounds like you had street smarts, though. You were asking your mother the kinds of questions and saying things. And I'm like, oh, you were picking up some things. But now you're going to this college and it's like, okay, I don't really know life outside of church and the camp.
Yeah. So, it was interesting because this college that I went to, it was the person who started this Bible college, which was not accredited, was best friends with the person who started the camp.
Oh
So
my God.
it was just another camp, really.
Oh,
Like, it was
God.
like you weren't allowed to have your phone, you didn't have any internet. It was you and God and acres of land and Bible studies constantly. Like, yeah. So that got old real quick.
Oh my gosh. And it's like, how many kids? Like, I went to BU, like Boston University is huge. It's massive in the middle of the city. You're in still in Podunk, New Jersey? Like, are you still in Jersey?
This is in Pennsylvania.
Oh, you're now
yeah.
Okay. So now you're in Pennsylvania, in the cow fields or whatever, Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
middle of nowhere. How many kids roughly do you think are at this college? Is it like a 4-year school?
It's a 3-year.
Oh.
And so you did 2 years of studies and then you did a year internship. And I did, I want to say sometimes I try to forget that part. It's very cringy to think about poor little Alesia who knew nothing. But there were maybe 150 students at one time over the course of three collective years.
So small. Okay, so wait a minute. Let's just back up for a second, because you're like, it's kind of cringy, but it's like that part of you was just doing the best that she knew how to do. Like that part of you really, it's so easy. And I'm not coaching you or correcting you, but I have so much compassion for that younger version of you. I have so much compassion, like that part of you that was just trying to figure it out and make her way. And it's like, oh God, I know. Look, we all look back on those younger versions, and sometimes we're like, oh, like I know the cringe. It's like, oh God, what was she thinking? And I have to, because I used to have a lot of contempt, right, for those younger versions of myself, until I learned how to and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, for me to learn how to look back and extend compassion, because we were just doing what we knew how to do,
Mm-hmm.
So you graduate from this college. It's not accredited though. So does your
I did not
degree
graduate.
Oh, you did not. Oh, okay, the plot thickens. Okay. See, I know nothing about this part. Okay, so go ahead.
So what happened was, after my first year, my mom left the camp for a summer. We moved to Arizona with the religious aunt and uncle, and I wasn't going to go back. Then I wasn't going to go back to the Bible college. I was just going to go to college out in Arizona, and I was going to work, and I was just going to do my thing. My mom decided she wanted to go back to the camp after a few months. I wanted to stay, and my aunt and uncle told me no, they would not take me, which leaves me with no options, right? Like literally still no bank account, minus what I made over the summer.
Yeah.
No actual life skills, still don't have a driving license. What am I supposed to do other than just follow my mom back to the camp?
I get it.
We go back to the camp. So I'm like, sure, fine, I'll go back. Go back to college for year 2. That one was more tolerable because I made some fun friends and I broke a ton of rules.
Okay.
I kept my phone on me, and I was just like, yeah, no, the phone will be hidden and I will do whatever I want. So that's what I did. I also, anytime they were doing events, I would sit in the library and I would read sermons after sermons after sermons, because I would rather do that than be around these crazy people. So that was year 2. Year 3, I was supposed to go to North Carolina to work at a small church that was founded by some alumni that went to that place.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up falling through. So my internship ended up being in New York City, which so now you're putting rebellious Alesia in New York City.
Okay, I'm sensing a turning point here. Dear storytellers. Yes. I'm sensing a plot twist. Here we go. Okay.
Yes. So you've got rebellious Alesia, who now has a tattoo and a belly button ring. And also, which, I'm not against tattoos, but no, you understand.
I feel what you're saying. I get it.
And who has now discovered online dating, which is not online dating at that point. It's literally just hooking up.
Sure.
So discovering that and being like, wow, this is crazy. And then I got in trouble because I stayed over a guy's house and I wasn't supposed to, and someone told on me. Whatever. So
wait. So even though you're in New York, you have your little spies that are reporting back to Bible college or whatever, right? Okay. So you're being rebellious. You're doing this. You're going to your internship. You're doing this stuff. But your internship, was it at a church? Is that where you?
Yes.
Okay.
It's at a mega church.
So church work by day, doing all kinds of shenanigans at night is what I'm hearing. Okay.
Yes.
And continue.
Yes. So there I actually worked in the accounting department. Loved it. Loved numbers, loved doing that. Was like, this is what I want to go to school for. And so when I ended up getting found out, right, that I was
in trouble
with my escapades,
yes,
I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to leave before you tell me to. So I did. Come to find out, they were not going to kick me out at all. I don't know why, but they weren't going to kick me out because they needed me. They needed me to keep working. And I was like, well, I'm done. I'm so done. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm sick of doing this. So I moved back to the camp, right? At this point, I've got my license.
Good for you. Now, wait, that's a big deal. So do you take yourself to get a license, or is there any mentor along the way? I know later in corporate and stuff, and we'll get there, but what is it an inner drive? Is it like what I would call, some people might call it Holy Spirit. Some people might call it intuition in a teacher, gut instinct, right? Spiritual team. So what's driving you, right? So these things, it's like, maybe the tattoo and the belly ring are a little bit of a fuck you, right? Whatever. We're pushing back against authority. You're discovering sex. You're doing all these things. But to get a driver's license, that is about autonomy and freedom and being able to get away, right? Being able to go where you want to go, to not be at the mercy of other people. So you know, we just dropped that like, oh, I got a license. I'm like, wait a minute. But like, how did you get that license? How did that come to be?
So that came to be because at that point, my mom had gone through the program. Yes, she had gotten her GED, right? So you're looking at me at like 14, 15. She got her GED and she started going to nursing school. And so she became a registered nurse.
Wow.
The camp still controlled her money up until I want to say we left that first time. And so because they were trying to help her save, is what they said.
I start to get pissed. Okay. I'm like,
yeah.
Okay. And we're back. Okay.
Yes. They still controlled the money because they were trying to help her save for a car. At that point, she got married when I was 18 to the camp's, the leader, the woman, her brother, who is dysfunctional as well. She ends up marrying him. After we left, because he came with us to Arizona. After we came back from Arizona, around the time when I had gotten into all that trouble with the college, my mom was like, well, he left. And I have 4 kids still at home, or 3 kids at that point, still at home. Can you help? And so I was like, sure. So me getting a license was more about being able to help her navigate the kids still going to the camp to go to school and stuff, and then her being able to go to work. And so it was more about that. And so we lived off the camp, but in a building that they owned. So it was like
an extension. It was still an extension of the community. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was like 30 minutes away. So it was a little more freedom, right? And so there needed to be a drive or someone to be able to drive the kids into school every morning. And so I worked there for I want to say 6 months. So from January through to the end of, I guess more than 6 months, 8 months, through the end of that summer, and ended up doing like homeschooling.
You worked at the camp? Grade. Is that what you're telling me? So you would
Yep.
drive your siblings and then do your job and then like take everybody home basically?
Yep.
Oh God.
Yeah. And I homeschooled 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. Worst thing ever. I don't like other people's children very much.
Well, wait a minute though. I mean, you spent so much of your childhood in a caretaker's role. And when you have a parent who's an addict, you automatically become, I know it's not the proper word, but parentalized. Like you were asked to be a parent at a very young age. Your own needs, your own wants, your own innocence and wonder and childlike enthusiasm to follow what you were curious about, what you wanted to do. So much of your energy was into taking care of other people. So I can
Yeah.
understand, like, as you start to get older, it's like, yeah, it's taking care of other people's kids. You're like, I've already been doing this. Even though they were your siblings, they were somebody else's kid, It's like, oh my God.
Mhm.
Okay, because so I want to know, and I'm not trying to speed things up, but I'm fascinated by how you go from like working on campus. You get a little, as my friend Linda Ty would say, you get a little sip. You get a little sip of accounting, and you start to realize I'm good with numbers. I gotta, you start to realize your mind is actually quite nimble and can think on things. But at some point, like at what age, like how do we get out of there and all of a sudden like corporate? Like was there like a series? And if you have more to tell me about the camp and that transition, I want to hear it. But I'm curious to know like how you eventually get out of there and you start to work in some like, let's call it secular, like businesses that are separate from the reign of the camp and the camp director and all that stuff. Because you found a mentor, I think you mentioned. There was somebody who would ask your opinion a lot and try to get you to start to think for yourself and what did you like and what did you want? So like bridge that gap for me.
Yeah. So at this point, the camp was starting to dwindle. The person who was pretty much funding the camp had passed away, and his son had taken over that company or that ministry, whatever. So money was starting to dwindle. The camp was starting to disperse at that point. By the time I had my oldest, I would say by 2015, the camp was completely gone and had been sold. And so you're looking at 2012, 2013 at this point. So we're getting close to that end to the reign, the end of the reign of the camp.
Yeah. So, but wait, so 2011 is when you left the camp, right? And when did you have your first kid?
No. So I left the camp. That would have been we arrived in 2001. So I left in 2012. 2013, somewhere around there. And then I ended up moving in with my now husband right after that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like you meet a guy and then it's like,
Mhm.
bam, like we're together. And then like you're popping out some babies, right? Like it happened, that
Very
transition
quickly.
happened quickly, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, am I doing my math right here?
No, you are.
So
Yes.
he must have been, I mean, you're still together and you had a
Mhm.
second one, right? A second child, a second son. So that's fantastic. I'm excited about that. I mean, I'm assuming you guys are happy or you like being
Yes.
with because you picked a move. Okay. So continue with your story. So basically the camp is falling apart. The funding is going, it's dispersing. And it's like, now I got to make some decisions. Like what happened?
Well, so at that point, I had started going to the community college. So I was no longer working at the camp, but I was going to community college. That was like right in between the house and the camp. That's where I met Chris, my now husband. He was a friend of a friend. And then
And he
my
had
mom,
nothing to do with that
nothing.
whole scene. Okay, continue.
Nope, nothing to do with that.
Thank you.
I had been dating somebody else when I met him. Like my kids love hearing that story. It's hilarious. So I was dating somebody else at the time. That fell through, and I started dating him. Or more, I broke up with that guy to date my now husband.
Mhm.
And so ended up moving in with him because my mom wanted to move to Syracuse.
Mm.
And I was like, look, I am done taking care of you and taking care of these kids and doing all of this. You're going to have family. You don't need me. You're going to be
Yes.
up there with family.
Yes.
It's fine. And I want to kind of live my own life.
Yes.
And then 4 months later, I was pregnant.
Okay. Okay. But at least
So
now you're
that
going to be
happened.
taking care of your own kid. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So right the month before I got pregnant, I was pumping gas at a Wawa, networking, connecting, getting to know people, and ended up talking to someone who was the head of the US for this manufacturing plant. He was like, yeah,
Wait a minute.
here's
Okay, you're pumping gas.
Yes.
Little chatty Cathy, striking up the conversations. You're charming. You're doing your whole thing. You're pumping gas for this guy, and somehow you find out he's the head of this manufacturing company.
Well, so he says, oh, up the street, we're hiring. here's my card. And I didn't realize who he was. I later found out, like, oh, you know him? You're definitely hired, kind of thing.
Wow.
So, like,
But
you're
wait,
talking, yeah, go ahead.
what do you think he saw in you? He doesn't just hand out cards to like every Wawa employee. So what do
Right.
you think it was about you that caught his eye or ear? What did he see in you?
I think it was my work ethic, number one, of like I'm doing things, but also the interest in what he does, right? So I asked him first, what do you do for like what do you
While
do
you're
for
pumping
work?
his gas,
Pumping his gas.
it's
What
a
do you
full
do for
service
work?
station. Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I'm chatting him up and he's like, "Oh, this is what I do." I'm like, "Wow, that's really interesting. I don't think I know any." Like I'm conversing
Mhm.
very naturally. Um and I was like, "Yeah, I'm looking for like some local jobs and but it sounds like you're doing a lot of traveling. Like that's pretty crazy. That's cool though." And he was like, "Oh, well, up the street we have a facility and we're
Mhm.
hiring." And so
Mhm.
that's how it kind of happened. And so I ended up going to this facility and working there. And I worked there for 5 years. And then they moved
Wow.
us um down, like paid to move us down to North Carolina. But before that, one of my bosses there, I still keep in touch with him today. And I have
Hmm.
actually called him and said, thank you for being such an incredible boss because I model how I am a boss now off of how you were. And he was so empowering, like very giving people like the best way I can describe it is he would never give people work he wasn't willing to do.
Okay.
Like he was just such a fantastic and empowering boss while still teaching you and showing you. And anytime that he was correcting you, it was not about like, oh, you're terrible, you did this wrong. It was how can we do this better? It was always about doing it better.
Okay.
And yeah,
Which makes it about the process and not the person.
yeah.
So this is okay, great. Now you've just opened up the door for me to kind of dive into this whole thing because I know in so many churches and religions and like the Mormons, it's like the elders, and in like other churches and organizations, it's the leaders. So you have this quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, leadership. So you go from a leadership style that, again, don't want to put words in your mouth, felt a very particular way.
Yeah.
And then you have this other boss who it sounds to me like I would call that your mentor, who ends up being a mentor for you, a great mentor, not just a boss, right? Again, don't want to put words in your mouth. But he's got a leadership style that you see is so empowering. So for anybody, and look, I think if you're a parent, you're a leader. If you own a
Hmm.
business, you are, even if all you're leading is yourself, you're a leader. You got a little team, you're a leader. So tell me so you named a couple of things. Are there any other things, like you said, like his style was that even if he was quote unquote correcting you, it was never about shaming you or making you feel stupid. It was about learning how to do whatever you were doing better. He was empowering. So, can you kind of just share? Because if you have taken these qualities into your own business and how you lead, if you could give me your top 5 favorite things, and there's probably 10 or 20, but you're just top 5, they don't have to be written in stone. You can change your mind later. But if you're going to share 5 things for the listeners out there who are leaders in their own lives, like what were those qualities that you thought were fantastic and that you still use?
Yeah. So I would say collaborative
Mm,
is definitely one. Um, he didn't shy away from asking for additional input from those who were quote unquote under him. It
mhm.
was always about the collective, right? And like all of us doing better as a team. So a lot of that. Um, he called me on my shit too.
Yeah.
He would be like, Alicia, you are an asshole right now. And I'd be like, well, because usually it would be me having to train someone to do something and they were just so dumb. And I would be and I would be a dick to this person. He'd be
Mhm.
like, Alicia, stop being an asshole. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Since you said so. All right. Because I
Yeah.
respected him, right?
Sure.
So he would call me on my shit. Um, Anytime that it was a mistake, it was we, right?
Yes.
So we made a mistake. How can we do better? He grouped
Yes.
himself in with the mistake. It was never a finger pointing game, which I really appreciated. And what's another one? Yeah, it was kind of funny because sometimes there would be almost like a us against them, which maybe isn't the best quality, but I loved because we were a team, right? And so it might be
Mhm.
our team against their team,
Like that
or
camaraderie, that connection.
yes, yeah, of like, yeah, we know their dicks. All right, like, here's how we're gonna try to make it better for both of us, but we know,
We re-
so like,
yeah.
like there's like that kind of thing. And then also making sure that I was paid what I was worth. That was a
Okay.
huge one, especially as a woman in manufacturing, right? So there are 150 dudes to 5 women. And, the women are being underpaid.
Are you the only woman
And
of color, or are there other people who look like you? Do you feel like there's any other people you can connect with that?
there was one Hispanic woman.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, I feel like there was a variety. So there was most of the women were older. And so you're looking at 30 plus, and I'm 22 coming in,
Yes.
21 coming in.
Yes.
And a lot younger than them, don't have a degree, but I'm working on my degree. I'm a brand new mom, all of
Oh,
these things. And so like literally when they said, what do you expect to be paid when I first got to the job? I was like, look, I'm making like 9 something an hour at Wawa. I would like to make $13 an hour. And they were like, well, starting is 15. And I was like, well, thank you for telling me that.
oh,
Like
so
that
great
was
that
great.
they didn't take advantage. That
Right.
they right that they were like, hey, well then you're in luck because starting is
Yes.
15, and this is let's just say this. Can we just pause for a moment? Somebody, Emmeline, I think it was Emmeline, posted something the other day about how she had a new client and they had this long talk and they were talking all about like her history and whatever. And she's like, and it occurred to me, there's all this stuff in my resume, like in my backstory that I've forgotten, these skills and stuff that I had. And it made me start to think about like having a resume. Like I've worked for myself for like 22, Jesus Christ, for like a long time, like 25 years, I've been an entrepreneur, whatever it is. And I thought, oh my God, if I had to write a resume right now, like I would be crippled. I'm like, I don't even know what I would say. But here's my point. When you go into a job and they say, how much do you expect to be paid or want to be paid? I just think like, I don't even like, I was like, how would I even know how to answer that? And I just love your naivety, like of going in and saying, well, right now I make $9 and I'd like to make 13. And I just think like, oh my God, like, thank God, thank goodness, whatever, that they didn't try to just like take you out of the knees and take advantage of you. I love that. And I'm assuming you probably got promoted or got raises fairly quickly. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So every year there were bonuses, but then there was a year where I actually took over another person's job, even though my title didn't change. And my boss was like, absolutely not. She's getting classified in this other range. Like he fought for me to get that raise,
Oh,
like all the way up to the plant
we love
manager.
him. What's his
Yes, we
first
love
name?
him.
What's his first name?
Bobby.
Bobby, we love you. If you listen to this right now, thank you for advocating for my friend Alesia. Thank you for trying to empower her and seeing the brilliance in her and supporting her. Like that. Look, here's the thing. None of us are self-made. Like having people in our lives who like see us, like to have somebody who truly saw you and saw your
Yeah.
gifts and saw how hard you were working and trying, like man, I just get so, I was just like, makes me happy. Okay, continue. So you rise up, you start making more cash and you're there for 5 years. So this is the thing. And then they're like, we're opening up a new place in North Carolina. Did you get
No,
nervous about moving to the Carolinas? Can we
I
be like, was
did.
it a little
Yes.
like, I don't know what, no
Yeah.
disrespect, North Carolina, like all the Carolinas people. My uncle's actually in Myrtle Beach right now. But
Nice.
so like, what, what is that about? Like, you're gonna go up and did you visit first? I mean, like,
So this came about quite interestingly. This was 2017. I was 5 months pregnant. And I was like, look, we're trying to buy a house eventually. We'd like land. We cannot survive. And my husband was not homeschooling at this time. He was working a job as well. My oldest was going to his grandmother's, so it's not like we had daycare costs that much. I mean, he maybe had went to daycare like once or twice a week. Like it was very minimal.
Like Grandma Galati, he was going over there.
Yes.
Okay.
So like we had money saved up and we were like, we want to buy a house, but it's so expensive to buy a house in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. Where are some other places that we could move to just move? Like we're young, let's do it.
Okay, look it. So this is what happens with people. Like, I'm sure people come up to you or say things to you like, your story is so extraordinary. Or like, oh my God, I can't believe you turned out so normal. Or all the shit that people tell people, like those of us with really traumatic young stories, right? We always get told like, oh my God, you're amazing. And in our heads, we're like, dude, I was just surviving. I was just living my life. There's nothing special about me. Trust me, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we're having an alternate experience. But you're just dropping like, and again, I'm not trying to be like a pain in the ass to you, but you're just glossing over these big things like, oh, I got a license. You're like, we knew we wanted land. We knew we wanted to do this. We had saved up money. I'm like, pump the brakes. How does a cult kid who had no autonomy, watched your mother not be trusted with her own money? So either Chris is influencing you, your boss is influencing you, or you're influencing you to say, and this is what I'm saying, like the fact that you have your own business now and you have a team and we're going there, but these Mark is along the way, like getting your license and, meeting somebody and moving in and like deciding like, no, I'm leaving that stupid college. And even that spark, that I would call it a divine spark, but it was a divine spark. I think of it as that rebelliousness of like, I'm staying in Arizona. I'm not going back there, right? There's all these little things. So how did you know to save money? Like, how does one who came from like not having any money, getting handouts, let's call it what it was, right? Government cheese and like the consignment shop on campus at the camp. What happens? Is your sweetie really good with money, or do you just start to think like, I'm going to do it different? Like what happened?
So I am not great with money. I don't think my sweetie's great with money either. I think what it is when I have a goal or when we have a goal, and we had the previous year saved up for our wedding because we paid for it because neither of our parents were going to pay for it, right? Like we saved up for our wedding. And we were both making great money at the time. Like everything was just like literally one of our paychecks was going to bills, and that is it. And so the other paycheck just went towards savings. And that was it. Like we did that.
So your goal was, we want to own a house, our own home with land. So you started socking the cash away. And then now there's an opportunity to go to North Carolina, basically.
Yeah, they had an opening and they were like, oh yeah, we want more people that are trained within the company. I nudged the head of the US again, like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think?
But like, what are you doing in your job? Like, what is manufacturing mean? I know somebody's like, thank you, Jesus, for finally asking this question. Like, because I'm trying to connect the dots. We go from like working at the church, you're in school, and then pumping gas, and now we're in manufacturing. What does it mean to be in manufacturing? Like, what is your day? Like, what are you doing? What do you First of all, what is your company manufacturing? What are you doing?
So I worked for Lindy, which is a air. That's not right. Kind of like a mix of oxygen tanks for people, nitrous oxide tanks for dentists. But I worked in the specialty gases. So what we were doing was we were making gas combinations that like Toshiba, Intel, Samsung were using to make lasers to make microchips. That's
okay, but are you on
on
a conveyor line? Are you in an office? Are you bossing people around? Like, what's your role?
Right. So my role started as a handler, which meant this part of the manufacturing plant needs cylinders. I'm moving cylinders the size of my body. Like we're moving those, which I think is why the person was like, oh, well, you're out here in inclement weather pumping gas. I'm sure you could handle being a handler.
Do you have a forklift license? Like, this is what I'm
No.
picturing. Are you like rolling
So
stuff on cats? Or are you like boop, boop, boop?
yes.
Like, okay.
Like they're small forklifts. They're
Yeah.
like not the big ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was doing that. I was moving those and ended up working a lot in the office though, since for that part of the like handling side of okay, printing out the production sheet, what kind of cylinders does each part of the plant need, and figuring out, do we have enough to fulfill these orders? So I was working between the production planner and the cylinder handlers and saying, hey, we need this, or we have an emergency for this, and like going back and
You were
forth.
the go-between. Gotcha. You're
Yes.
communicating. So you're learning
yeah.
to communicate.
Yes.
You're learning to be timely. You're learning to do like you're all these moving parts. Because it sounds simple to say, oh, I was physically moving these cylinders, but there's so much more that is happening underneath the surface. You probably learned so much at this gig in different areas. Like I can just picture you like bopping around the plant, like getting to know all these different, even if you didn't do those positions, you understood, I'm assuming, like how they, right? Okay, continue.
Yeah. So then when we moved down to North Carolina, I actually took over a lot of the production planning. So where the other facility, I was kind of the go-between. Now I'm the go-between between the plant and customer service. So now I'm having to interact with customer service, who are assholes, but I'm having,
like, wait,
having to
meaning
interact
the
with them.
customers or the department?
The department.
Gotcha.
I'm having to deal with them because everything's a freaking emergency for them. Also trying to handle like going to each of the different facilities saying, here's your production plan for the day. Let me know if you have any questions. Pretty much bossing people around, telling them what to do, which was great. But like also going on the floor and working. And this is something where like I really feel Bobby instilled.
Yes.
Like if someone needed help, I was going to be there and help them. Right.
You weren't
like,
above it. He wasn't below you.
Exactly. If someone needed help, they were open to asking. Like they never had a problem saying, hey, I need help with this, or hey, I have a question about this. As long as I had my coffee first, they knew. Don't bother Alesia before she's had her coffee. Yes. But like, yeah, I just was able to be the in-between for all of that, which really helped to be able to like do what I do now. Created a lot of processes from scratch of like how to train people to do things, training people to do their jobs. Sat in with the production manager with new hires to see if, you know, what I thought about them as potentially joining the team, if they would be good for joining the team. All of those kinds of skills definitely amped up when I moved down here. But I was working an hour and a half or an hour and 10 minutes from my house. And so my husband at that point was home. We had bought the house that we now have, 3-bedroom, 2-bath on like about half an acre. So we've got a decent amount of land,
sure,
especially for around here. But it's an hour from where I was working. So I'd have to drive an hour in every morning, drive an hour home every night, barely seeing my kids. I would be leave before they got up. And by the time I got home, they were getting ready for bed.
And so he's at this point, you guys decide that he's going to stay home. You're going to continue working. So you're the main breadwinner. Even before starting your own business and your own company, you were doing this. Okay. And so what's the breaking point? And like, here's the thing though, too. You start listening to podcasts in 2015 is what happens. You get a thought like, I could do this, or I could do it better, or I could help people do this. Like, how do we go from manufacturing specialty gases and doing all these things? But listeners, if you're paying attention, I hope you're paying attention, because she's dropping clues. Alesia's dropping all these clues as to what she was paying attention to and how it now allows you to run your own business. And this is what I find fascinating. And this is why I'm so glad we took this arc of your story, because how you do what you do now, like you have your own process, you have all these things. We'll get into that. Okay. So somewhere in that driving back and forth, are you listening to podcasts? Like what happens? Like, how do we make the jump?
Yeah. So at that point, I had been already listening to podcasts. I was actually in the online space. So I've been in the online space since about 2015, doing digital marketing, content creation, marketing. I already said marketing, writing blog posts, all of that kind of stuff. So anyone.
But so by day, you're working at this manufacturing plant.
Working in the manufacturing plant, getting my associates, then moving on to get my bachelor's, being a mom, planning a wedding, and doing a little side hustle stuff.
But okay, so why the side hustle? Like you're at home and you think, I want more money or I want to do something creative. Like, how does one just decide online marketing? Were you a marketing major? Like, did you go in? Okay, that explains it. Okay, so you get
Yeah.
your bachelor's in marketing and
Marketing.
business. Okay, this now
And
that
I have
explains it.
dual bachelors, one in marketing, one in business management. But the reason behind getting into the online space in the first place, and like I've done everything, tried everything. I'm multi-passionate, right? Like I love
Sure.
trying new things, lifelong learner, like we said at the beginning. But one thing that I want, this is like a driving force of my now adulthood, is that I want to be able to give my kids better than what I had. So my first vacation was my honeymoon.
Yeah.
That's not going to be my kids. They're going to have vacations. They're going to have the weekend trips to the beaches. They're going to have all of those things. And the idea, and maybe this is the whole rebellious thing, the idea of being capped to what somebody else says my income is was like, no, I don't really like that. I want to decide. And it was never about being a stay-at-home mom, because I don't want to do that. It was never about that. It was about being able to control the life that I want to have because of that lack of control throughout my whole childhood. It was about being able to make that, like, kind of grab life by the reins and say, this is what I want and this is what I'm going for.
And 100%. And this is it. This is it. This is it. This is it. This is what I'm saying. So this lack of control, and this is why I'll often say to my clients when we talk about like all the stuff that we've been through. I mean, there's 1,001 ways to suffer as humans. And I'm like, if we're gonna blame like our parents, our past, these tragedies, these trauma, all these awful things for all the bad parts and all the stuff, we also have to be willing to look at, like, I'm like, I've turned my traumas, some of them, into superpowers. That's like, you were like because like you would not be who you are. I'm not saying you have to be grateful for it. I mean, that helps some at some point if you're ready for it, right? But to not carry around this grievance and this, but to be able to look back and say, even if all that gave you was the inspiration to be totally different, to do it differently, to want to whatever, that's a pretty powerful thing that you are able to say, not on my watch. Now that I've got a little power, like you are not going to hold me down. You are not going to control my money. I'm thinking back, like all the things you've told me about your mom, like you were paying attention. Your subconscious was recording everything. And it was like, no. So I love that you're like, okay, I start to do this side hustle. I start to do some marketing and stuff. But then how did we get to podcasting and now managing other people? And, you know, I think the way that you describe what you do, and I'm going to read it in a second, because I want to not pick apart, but I want to dive into these particulars. Yeah. But so tell us how all of a sudden the idea is like, Galati Media, like what happens?
Yeah. So I end up finding a job that's closer. So I left that job that I had been at for 5 years, and I end up working at a different one for 2 years. During that time, my mom passes away. And I was at that point starting my own podcast because I wanted to find the easiest way to get consistent content out there. I knew that's what I needed to do, and blogging was just not it for me. So I knew a podcast would probably be the easiest way to get my message out to people, and that was based around inventory and marketing strategies for small e-commerce businesses. Now, at the time, you're looking at 2018, 2019, nobody was talking to small e-commerce businesses in the podcasting space. So I knew I had a foothold right there, but I was doing it for my day job. I was an inventory analyst for a car oil company that was local. It was so boring. I hated it so much. That job was just, and it was fine. Like the job was fine. It was just, I didn't have nearly as much interactions as I did at the previous job. I wasn't that multi-passionateness of like being in all the things.
Yes.
I didn't get that. I was sitting at a desk all day long.
Just want to like stab yourself in the eye with your pen. Like, oh my God.
yeah. And so then I got let go due to COVID.
Okay,
And
so
so
wait. So I want to interrupt again. So what do you consider a small business, a small e-commerce business? Give us an example so the listeners
Mhm.
can be like, I understand what that is.
Yeah, so I'm thinking a product business that's probably selling on Shopify or Etsy that is run by a founder and a very small team. You're looking at 5 people or less.
Candle makers print things, they make like whatever it is. So it's product based, t-shirts, whatever,
Hmm.
repurposed artists, like creatives who are like doing this thing, and you want to help them get found by more people by
Yes.
using a podcast. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
I
Or
want to help their marketing strategies by
oh,
teaching them, right? And so
okay,
I
gotcha.
realized pretty quickly that I did not like doing that work. So I was doing that work as a side hustle, helping people with their inventory analysis, going in and helping them with their marketing. And I was like, I'm doing this for my day job, which I hate, and I'm also doing this as my side hustle, which I hate. Like why am I doing this? So then at the beginning of 2020, I was like, at this point I've launched 2 podcasts and I think I want to just give it a go and see if I can do it for other people because I know all the elements that need to go into it. I've launched 2 at this point. Let's give it a shot.
Okay, so let's start there because I know that somebody who's listening is like, I'm sure somebody has been toying with the idea of like, I want to start a podcast. Okay. So you are self-motivated. You are a self-learner. Is that correct? Is that fair
Yeah.
to say? So you start the podcast with your sister, two sisters in a cult. What's the second podcast? Is it listeners? I mean, is it already like it's something else? What's the
No,
other
so
one?
it's called the Honest Product Bench. You cannot find it
Yeah,
anywhere.
yeah.
It has since died because I don't want to do that work.
Yeah, yeah, no. So, but you had this thing that's what I wanted because I didn't think it was
Hmm.
listeners to leads. Okay, so you started a second podcast, and along the way, you're like, probably started with maybe you didn't because you did your research, but you got your Blue Yeti microphone, right? Like everybody starts with that microphone. So you start to have to figure out, like, okay, I gotta find a way to record this thing. All right, and then once I have it, how do I make it better or edit it or change the sound quality? And like, wait, am I going to do a video component of this or is it just audio? And you're asking all those questions that podcasters have to ask. And then how do I get it out there? Like, what's my distribution channel? What? Oh, wait, I need graphics. I need artwork. Like what? So you learned all of that. You had no mentor. You had no help. You just went and self-starter, self-motivated, did it on your own, learned the hard
Hmm.
way, made all the mistakes, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Okay, you got these 2 podcasts, and then you're like, ding, light bulb. I could probably help other people do this. And that's Galati Media. That's how it begins.
Yes. And I was fine having it as a side hustle. Like, I had no intention at all of having my own company and that be my full-time thing. I was perfectly content to say, that'll be my side hustle and I'm going to keep my corporate job because that sense of security,
Of course.
providing for my family is so important, right? Which is why that travels over to providing for my family is one of my core values now.
Yes, of course. And because again, you had a lifetime of seeing something, right? Seeing your parents, God bless them, did their best, whatever.
Mhm.
Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, not for me to say, but so you watched all this stuff and you watched the struggle and you were affected by that struggle and you were determined, like, this story is going to end differently. Like
Yeah.
my story is going to end differently. My kid's story is going to end differently. So you start to do this work. Now, how does one go like, well, now I got to find somebody who actually wants to hire me? So how do you start peddling your wares? Like, what do? You just start putting it out there? Like you start talking to people like you did at the gas station and like, oh, you should start a podcast. Like, what did you do to get your first client?
So, how I got my first client was I'd been sitting on this idea and I knew I was going to move into it, but getting let go really kind of was the universe nudging me off the ledge and saying, "All
Wait, you
right, do
got
this
fired?
thing." I got let go due to COVID. Yeah.
Oh, because of the pandemic. And then they're like,
Mhm.
okay, we don't need you anymore. So
Yep.
you already had this idea of brewing though, right?
Mhm.
And so here we go, deliver, like they cleared the pathway. They cleared the pathway for you to be able to do this. Okay. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I got the severance, which allowed me to have a little bit of wiggle room, and said, all right, I'm going to go on social media. I have all these connections from years in the online space. Now, who wants to launch a podcast? It's going to be super cheap. Like, I just want to see if I can do this.
That's what you
And
said.
so
Who
that's,
wants to
yeah,
launch one? It's going to be wicked cheap. And like, let's go.
yes. And so that's exactly what I did. And that's how I got my first client. And that client is still with me today.
All right. That's fantastic. That is so good. Okay. So you talk about it like this. I am a podcast producer and manager for business owners and thought leaders looking to have a lead generating podcast. Okay, but this is the next line that I'm really interested in. I love serving the world by helping no BS coaches, which I would consider myself one of those. So, but here's what I want to ask you. What does a no BS coach mean to you? What does that mean to you? Because you chose to say that specifically for a reason. And again, I can't help but feel like it goes back to seeing these people, because coaches are like, look, there are some coaches who have made it big out there that it's a little culty. It's a little creepy. You know what I'm saying? So the no BS part, do you think on some level that's pointing back again to like your childhood and the people who were quote unquote leading others or giving others advice or whatever? So why no BS coach, and what does that actually mean to you? How can somebody self-identify as maybe your perfect client?
Yeah, so it's funny because the No BS coach is on the about page that needs to be changed.
Okay, so great. So that was my next question, because I
Yeah.
noticed that you say in your official bio, you help coaches and thought leaders launch. And then you said, and you've maintained over 50 podcasts. Okay. So let's strike. If you're like, I'm glad
Yeah.
we're bringing it up. So that's not your top, let's call it whatever. That's not your ideal client anymore. It's just coaches,
So it is, but it's like, it's the person. Sorry, I'm hearing myself revert back. Do you hear me?
No,
No? Okay.
no, it's not
It
echoing on my
stopped.
end.
That's so
Okay.
weird. Okay. So for me, it's about both the no BS coach and the business owner and the thought leader. Those business owners and those thought leaders are creating messages that make a difference.
Yes.
The no BS coach is creating messages that make a difference. And I think I hired Emily to kind of pull that kind of that quote, the messages that make a difference, messages that matter.
Yes.
That's what we want to create. And I think both of those tie back to that, of wanting to work with people that are kind of like Bobby, lifting people up along with them, not holding people down or constraining them or controlling them, but more about let's all rise together and let's make your day better. Let's make your life better. Like those are the kinds of people that I want to work with. And that we do work with, which is so incredible. Like, so like the people we work with, and we've gotten to a point now where we are almost exclusively working with people who have some type of impact driven or values driven business. And that just lights us up.
Well, to be able to work with people, like in the beginning, sometimes it's like, I imagine for all kinds of different, work, you get whoever's going to help you get started and pay your bills. And it's like, you feel like maybe for some people, it's like you had to sell your soul. And I talk about it, like I'm married to a professional musician. I'm a creative and a storyteller and a writer. I mean, that's how I identify first and foremost. Yes, like you, I'm multi-passionate. I do a lot of things, but I know a lot of artists and people, whether they're musicians or dancers or writers or whatever, who paid for their dream from their day job, right? So sometimes in the beginning, it's like you got to take a few people and you might be like, I don't know, like, but then when you get to a place where you can start to decide, because your work is an extension in some way of you and who the company you keep and the people you represent and the people that you help. Like, like I've been vegan for like over 20 years. That's only important. Well, it's important for a lot of reasons, but it's important only because in this example, I'm never going to hawk a non-vegan company. Meaning, if somebody came to me and they're like, "Hey, will you sell our leather shoes on your show or whatever?" I'd be like, "No." Like, "Hey, will you help us sell all hot dogs?" No, right? You know what I mean? So you want to be representing businesses that you can be proud of, and that you're not like not selling your soul for the money or whatever, right? So I think it's fantastic that you want to work with. And again, do you feel like can you see a clear connective thread to what you do now and going back to your experiences, your childhood experiences? Do you see it clearly?
Yeah, I think a lot of the decisions that I make now are definitely impacted by that.
Yeah.
I even find myself still saying, is that my thought or is that somebody else's? It happens a lot less frequently than
Yeah.
it did in my early 20s,
Sure.
but it still happens. I still have moments where I'm like, oh yeah, that happened. Oh, no wonder I do that way, like
Yes.
certain memories will resurface or whatever. So yeah, I'm very self-aware, which helps. But even beyond that, I'm very my sister said this. She was like, somehow you always just know like what to do. I'm always wondering like, oh, I've got a list of doctors to go to. How do I know which one? And I'm like, I don't know. I just know which one.
Okay.
Like there's just a lot of intuition
Thank
that
you.
is
Because
in
they're like, I
there.
don't know how I know. I'm like, no, because
Yeah, yeah.
so you trust yourself now.
Yeah.
You trust that inner voice, or call it intuition, call it whatever you want to call it, instinct, right? I call it inner teacher. I call it 1,000 names. I don't get hung up on the names. So there's a part of you that has developed self-trust. There is a part of you that trusts your own knowing. And that's huge. Like that's
Yeah.
huge. I mean,
And I think it goes back to because I question myself too. So like I'm not afraid to say, where does that thought come from? Like, wait, what's going on? That, you're not responsible for your first thought. It's the second thought that you're really
wow.
responsible for. Like I own that first
Yes.
thought is like that's either trauma talking or that is tends to be trauma talking or it's someone
Mm-hmm.
else's opinion or someone else's
Mm-hmm.
thought or society. It's all of those things that have kind of been ingrained in us as
Yes.
people. And so that first thought, you kind of have to stop and say, huh, wait a minute.
Well,
Okay.
the first thought,
Rethink.
yeah, I would say it like this. The first thought is your conditioning. The second thought is your choice.
Yes. And I trust that choice.
Yes. So, your subconscious, 90, 95, 97, 98% of everything we think, say, or do is coming from our subconscious. It's not conscious. That's why. So I have a part of me that I call Vicky with 2 Ks from Lawrence. And Vicky with 2 Ks from Lawrence is the first one to grab the mic. Like she wants the mic. She's got something to say. She's going to tell you how it is. And she's going to she's going to give it straight, right? She's going to tell it straight, which I love. And I always say, I give her jobs. Like there's certain conversations where I'm going to let her dial the phone and handle it. You know what I'm saying? But I don't want her running the show all the time.
Right.
So I love that this self-awareness has come out of it. And the fact that, because do you have any kind of spiritual practice these days? Do you do anything? Because what you are describing also, Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, he has that book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about how in between stimulus and response, there's like a moment. It's in that moment where we get to choose. It's in that moment where there's a pause, where we're not going to go into our addiction and our habit and our conditioning. And we go like, huh. And that's that moment for you where you go like, where's that thought coming from? Like, what's that about? Do you do
Mm-hmm.
something like meditation or contemplation or journaling or prayer, anything that allows you to slow down your mind so you can recognize like, oh, I'm going to choose love instead of fear. I'm going to make a choice rather than my conditioned reaction. I'm going to respond rather than react. Do you do anything that helps you? Like any kind of daily anything?
So I wouldn't say daily, but I have worked with both energy management coaches and so I worked with two separate coaches over the last, I want to say 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
One was more after my mom passed. I didn't want to go to a therapist, but I wanted to be able to manage my grief. not deal with it, but manage it because I still had to show up. And finding ways that I could utilize external resources to help me manage my grief to be able to show up how I needed to for this new job as well as a parent, right? Um, so I worked with her on that, and then I worked with a energy management coach, which was more about understanding reactions to things, which I really, really loved. And that helped me be able to kind of really step back and pause. Like, even though I was doing the pausing and thinking before reacting, this kind of helped me double down on that, especially as a leader and as someone in a relationship. That helped a lot because
Sure.
I would find that I would have all these feelings about something. Like, at one point, we had sent the oldest kid to school or to our local school for a year, to public school. And my husband would say something along the lines of, "Oh, I want to give him a half day today. Like, I just want to hang out. I want to do stuff," because he had the other child with him. And my instant feelings were like, absolutely not. Like, no, absolutely not. Like, why in the world would you do that? Like, and once I sat down with it, thought, why am I reacting so strongly to this? It
Yes.
was about the adults making choices that can impact the kids in their day in an either negative, in a potentially negative way. So he might be enjoying his day at school. And then because you want to do what you want to do, like my mom, you're negatively impacting his day when he was having a great day. And so once I was able to communicate that and say, this is why it bothers me, if we plan ahead and he knows, or if we plan ahead with the school and, hey, he's gonna have a half day, or he's gonna have the day off because of we're going to the zoo or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's different than just whim.
Being at the mercy of some random adult decision.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
working with the energy coach allowed me to say, okay, I'm showing up at this level to this situation. The other person's showing up at this level, not oh, I need to show up in a different way, but more of a curiosity of, I
Yes.
wonder what would happen if I showed up this way, or I wonder
Yes.
what would happen if I took a breath and then discussed it,
Yes.
right? So like a
Yes.
lot of that stuff helped me. So no, I don't. Yes, I have crystals and I have like stuff,
Sure.
candles and all that fun
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But like I don't do a daily practice. It's more about remembering and tapping into the things that I've learned to do better tomorrow. Like that's just how I kind of approach it.
Let me ask you this, because as a spiritual mentor, I always say, like, I don't, I'm like, call it God, source, love, universe, higher power. I always say the God of your own understanding, whatever you call it, right? Whatever anybody calls it. I have no attachment to anything sounding or looking a particular way. I am interested in helping people to connect more deeply, I say, with self, source, and spirit, whatever that means to you. So being in this very fundamentalist Christian kind of a situation, do you these days have a relationship with something, let's call it greater than, or what is did because I did a podcast episode saying, like, don't let them ruin God for you. And what I mean by that is, so often when people are in, even just Catholic kids who are like, I'm recovering Catholic, like whatever, right? All this stuff. And I'll say, you know, how do I say this? I think so much of the loneliness epidemic that we have now, and the way that even though we're more supposedly connected than ever, we are less connected with ourselves, the divine, right? The grace that exists, whatever. And I'm always interested when people go through those kinds of things. Did you like throw out the baby with the bathwater? Did you just push back and say, screw all of it? I want nothing to do with spirituality. I want nothing to do with religion. I want nothing to do with any of that. Do you have any kind of faith, or even, whatever, any kind of, I'm just curious what your relationship with what I would say the divine, right? Or God or whatever. Has that shifted or changed, or is it you're just like, pump the brakes, all set, got enough of it?
So when I first left the camp, I was still going to local church services, not at the camp, but still going to one that didn't feel constricting,
Yeah.
right? Still had a decent message. Now go about your week. You're the everyday Christian, right? And that felt good, really. Like it
Yeah.
felt like I was still in touch with spirituality, how I understood it at the time.
Yes.
And then I started opening myself up to yoga, which like that was one of those things where I kind of my first defining, is this my thought or is this somebody else's thought kind of moments because
Because yeah, as a yoga teacher of 20 over 25 years, like a lot of people, a lot of Christian people think it's the devil's work, it's evil,
yeah.
you're not allowed, whatever. So you're doing this like, okay, I'm doing this thing that somatically feels good, that is putting me in touch with myself and my breath and my body and all this stuff. And then you hear something in your head like, is this bad? Should I not be doing this? Right? Is that what's kind of happening? Yeah,
So
very, yeah.
as soon as someone was like, "Hey, you should go to I have a beginner yoga class that's happening like in locally. I want to go. Do you want to go with me?" And my first thought was, "That's satanic."
Right.
And then my second thought was, "What?" Wait a minute, what?
Oh, I love it.
Because I'd seen so many documentaries about how satanic
Oh
yoga
my
is. And it's like,
God.
I had to kind of step back and say, wait a minute, whose thoughts are these? And so I gave it a shot. And it was more about like exploring and then discovering and being like, wow,
Yes.
this feels really good. This is really enjoyable. And I started in my home first, watching yoga with Adrian, right? Like I started at home. Okay, let's
Mm-hmm.
test it out. See how, okay, sure, I'll go to a class, right? So there was that. I was still going to church at the time. And then when we moved down here, I mean, we're in the Bible Belt now, so there's like literally 5 churches in a mile radius. It's quite ridiculous. We have not been to any of the churches locally.
Yeah.
When my mom passed, before she passed, she was doing a lot of we would have a lot of discussions around what's next in life, like the great beyond, right? Like
Sure.
reincarnation, past
Afterlife,
lives,
whatever.
a
Yes.
lot of those kinds of conversations, which I thought were really interesting. And I was never like, oh, mom, that's dumb. But I was like, huh, okay, interesting, mom. I don't know that that's for me, but like I'm open to what other people are
Mm-hmm.
doing. And so when she passed and I started working with that energy coach, it was about tapping into your, and she was Catholic, but tapping into your guides and your angels, so like angels
Mm-hmm.
and guides and that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, I'm digging this is cool. So it was kind of like weaning off of religion, I would say.
Yeah.
um and like the idea of handing what I'm big feelings to a guide who could hold them until I'm ready to deal with them so I can do my things, like that felt really natural to me and good. um and then when I would say after I ended working with her, it was more about myself and like my own inner strength
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that like yes, there might be guides, there might be, I've always felt energetic
Sure.
things around me, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
negative and positive. Um I always felt that that was real, whatever forces those were, but I don't think I really tapped into my own inner power until more recently of being like, I don't really need angels and guides because I know what I'm doing. Like it just
Mm-hmm.
it feels like that now. It feels very like I don't need organized religion for sure. No
Mm-hmm.
organized anything.
Yep.
And like even with our kids, I mean, my husband grew up Catholic. Um, we don't practice in our house at all. It's actually really funny because my mother-in-law is religious. I don't even know if she goes to church, but she's religious. And like she was over for Easter or Thanksgiving one year, and she said something about she was grateful for God. And my oldest, he looks at me, he's like, what is she? We don't believe in God, mom. And I was like, mm-mm. Like everybody can believe what they want to believe. And we had
Mm-hmm.
that conversation, right? Like we don't judge other people. And I said, God is something different to everybody, right? Like kind of what your approach is.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we teach our kids. And I mean, we literally talk about the Roman gods and the Greek gods constantly. So like they
Mm-hmm.
understand the idea of like external powers
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff. But yeah, the idea of organized anything,
Yeah.
I say not for me.
Yeah. No, I'm always curious. And for a lot of people, people I was talking to on the call, I was a guest teacher in a program last night, and that's where a lot of people land, is they leave their churches, and then they just feel like they spent their whole childhood or their lives, the early or a lot of their lives being connected to something. And then when they leave that structure, they can feel like, it's like a balloon that nobody's holding the string anymore. And it's like, well, who am I? What am I? Whatever. So I'm always curious just to ask people kind of like because some people find a new way to have faith. Other people are just like, yeah, I'm just more spiritual. Like that's why I always ask people, what does that word mean to you? Or like, what do you think? So I appreciate you sharing like where you've kind of landed. And I would love to ask you now if you can help, like, if I know somebody's probably out there, because you say like, hey, I know what goes into creating a good podcast. I know what goes into it. I know what catches an audience's attention right away or something like that. So do you subscribe to the thing that everybody should have a podcast? Do you subscribe to, I often say everybody could, doesn't mean you should, right? Like, so if you're like, somebody's listening and they're like, I've got a story to tell, or I've got a message, because you've been talking about messages that matter and stuff like that. And they're like, I want to start a podcast. What do you think, if you're going to share a few components of like what makes a great podcast? What are you able to just kind of like rattle them off? Okay.
Yeah.
I want to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. Before we get into that, I actually want to add something to what we were previously talking about. I think to what you were saying about feeling like the air is kind of let out, or you're kind of lost your string to other people, your connection, especially when you're in a very seclusive religion, right? Or group or collective.
Yeah.
I would say the number one thing that's helped me feel more connected to other people outside of religion has been finding something that is something that I enjoy that transcends that, right? So for me, that's reading. So I read over 200 books a year. I read smutty romance novels, and I don't care who knows. Like, I will tell anybody. Who cares?
Well, yeah, I thought it was fascinating when you said, because I actually have it written down. I can show my notes. It says Rita, like Rita, right underneath 200 books read, because I'm a reader too. Books saved me. Books saved me as a child. And I'm also a writer and I'm a storyteller, but when you said earlier, I wouldn't go to the events. I would just sit in the library and I would read and read and read and read and read sermons and read sermons and read sermons. And I said, aha, again, there's one of those moments when even though I wish that the pathway to making you a reader was a little different, right? For younger you. What a gift that you fell in love with words. What a gift that you fell in love with reading. Like reading is a game changer, and I always say libraries, for poor kids, for kids with nothing, libraries, even the playing field for us to have a library card was to have power. Okay. There's my plug for libraries because I love them. But let's go back to this. So you're like, okay, you find connection to others through reading. And so are you part of a group that like loves romance novels or something? Is that what you're about to drop on us?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So I actually have a bookstagram with a friend who I met in the online space several years ago. I mean, I think we're going on 6 years that we've known each other now. And I started reading smutty romance novels. I mentioned it to her. She was like, I think I want to give that a try. I used to enjoy reading, but I haven't read as an adult. And we ended up bonding over these smutty romance novels that we love. So we created an Instagram account called We Read Smut, and now are connecting with other bookstagrammers who also read smut or maybe read thrillers, but also dabble in a little bit of this.
Yes.
And so we're able to use that to promote indie authors, to talk about the books that we're reading, to find a sense of community with people that it transcends religion, race, etc. It transcends all of that because it doesn't matter if it's smutty, we're going to read it.
You're connecting in the ways that you're the same and not in the ways that make you different. That's really powerful. And I'm always sharing, like just yesterday. So one of my friends has a new book coming out, and I'm always reading like 5 books at a time. But whenever somebody I know is like dropping a book, I like shout it out because I just think we got to help each other, man. This is how we make it through, is we support one another. So I love that you have a bookstagram. I love that you started a thing. And thank you for circling back and thinking about that and wanting to leave a way. And that's the thing I tell people too, you can be a church of one. Like, you know what I mean? Like and I use the word church, I'm doing air quotes, like, a lot of the language that was co-opted. And that's why even in my podcast, when I said, don't let them ruin God for you, God is like an idea. And it's what that means, what that word has come to mean. Just like I think there's certain words that get stolen, whether it's from women, from Black people, from other cultures. And it's like, oh, it's ours now. We make it mean this thing. I'm like, no. You get to decide for yourself what's true, what's right, what's whatever. You know what I'm saying? I see your eyes kind of going back. What's going through your head as I'm saying that?
Yes. No, I definitely agree. I think that, right now we're dealing with colonialism at its height, right? And like the effects of colonialism. And we talk to our kids about it constantly, especially with them being homeschooled. Like whenever Columbus Day comes around, my oldest will be like, we don't need to talk about him. He was a terrible human being. Moving on. Like, they know. And like, yes, it's so frustrating.
They know though, because you expose them to the truth, and you're not trying to make it look prettier for like white people and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like I look back and I think, oh my God, the shit that they taught us, you know what I mean? And just the bullshit and the lies, and like, even like how many presidents like own slaves. Like you think like this, at what point, people, take off the blinders, like, right? And let's be honest about like how this country was built and the systemic racism that still exists, that everybody kind of benefits from in I don't mean everybody the same way, but these structures that hold certain groups down or exclude. And that's my big thing too with religion. I'm like, I don't think Jesus hung out with the lepers and the whores and the prostitutes and the beggars and what. I'm like, anything that tries to like use quote unquote Jesus, this mystical figure, to run their own agenda, it's like, it's a racket, man. It's a racket. And so much of what's happening, like you're talking about colonialism, so much that's happening these days, you have got to stop and think for yourself, people. Why are they banning books that, that teach critical race theory? Why don't they want your children to know what really went down and how this country was built? Like, what are you so afraid of? I know what you're afraid of. You're afraid to lose your quote unquote power.
Yes. Yeah. Why is it okay for a man to give his wife an abortion pill, but if she were to do it on her own, she would go to jail and he would get a slap on the wrist? Why is it okay for librarians to be prosecuted because they keep banned books? Like, what? When child molesters get a few months? Like, come on. It's not about what they want. It's about the control. That's what it is.
It's all about
they care about their control, and that's it.
They do care about the control, and that's the thing. And this is why. And again, one of the reasons why I'm vegan, it's about giving a voice to the voiceless, right? Is like being able to, and I feel this way across the board. Something I only had 12 years with my mother, but something that she was an advocate for children. She, was a volunteer for the Massachusetts Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And my mother was adopted. My mother had her own tragic backstory. And then she was brutally murdered. And so the way that she spoke up for the people who had less power, and people have told me, your mother's mouth got her into trouble, because my mother would say no, my mother would speak up, and that kind of thing. And I just think she would be fucking appalled if she was still alive. She'd be appalled at the way that things are kind of unraveling and what we're seeing and what we're hearing. And it's all of it. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is I think that what a podcast does so powerfully is it gives you a voice. But you have to be, because I will say this, what makes a good podcast? Let's come back to that. What makes a good podcast? I think that you have got to be willing to own what you think and say what you think, and be willing to have not everybody like you, right? I've done a podcast that says if everybody likes you, you're doing it wrong, right? Because in order to kind of be that vanilla and that plain and that palatable to everybody, you're Cirque du Soleil'ing yourself. You are contorting yourself into something that is so bland out of your own fear of being rejected or judged or, abandoned or whatever. And I think, claiming it. And that's why I say on my podcast, I'll say every once in a while, I say, hey, I reserve the right to change my mind because I might be smarter a week from now than I am right now. I might learn something. So I know I could go back to 5 years ago and listen to some of my episodes and probably go like, did I say that? Like, meh. But I've learned, and that's part of it. You got to be willing to say, I don't know, and to look stupid and to whatever. But you have to own it with your conviction of like, because that's what having a voice is that I'm not just wishy-washy. I just don't sit around going like, I don't know. What do you think? What do you want for dinner? Right? That's not going to work. So tell me a couple of the qualities that you think, and then we'll start to wrap it up. What are a couple of the qualities that you think make a good podcast?
So the first is, I don't think everyone should have a podcast.
Yes.
I think that in order, which, sounds silly for someone who works in this industry, but I really don't. I think that in order to have a successful podcast, and success is very limited to what you decide that success looks like. And that success should only be based on your own numbers, not somebody else's numbers.
Yes,
so I'm just going to preface all that.
I agree.
That a successful podcast is one where if you look at the top charts, right? So if we're just looking at those, they know their audience. They are so clear on who they are talking to and what they're trying to speak to that they don't deviate from that. And I think that is what is so important with podcasting. If you want to have a successful podcast and you want to attract the right types of people, repel the right types of people, then what you need to be is super clear. And that's why I tend to not work with people who are just starting their business or who are newer into this idea of whatever they want to talk about. Most of the time I will tell them, go be on a couple podcasts first. Get super clear on your message before you start a podcast, because it is not a get rich quick scheme. It is not going to get you any amount of extra followers quickly. It is a long game. And
it is a long
game.
game.
Decide that you're going to do it. So you have to be clear on your message. You have to be clear on your audience, and you have to be committed to whatever your own abilities are, right? So if you decide, hey, look, I think I can show up every week, then you better show up every week. Podcasters are finicky. They want to binge your past episodes, but if you miss a week, they might not come back. So whatever you say you're going to do it.
That consistency. And like you said, like some people might be like, I have a friend in his podcast is like a Star Wars 7x7. It's the only daily Star Wars podcast. And he's been doing it like forever. And he's a daily podcaster. There are other people like me who are weekly. There are other people who are bi-weekly, like whatever, but whatever it is. And it doesn't mean you can't change and do a new season but you got to communicate like, this is my intention, because you are right. People look at to be able to consistently engage with somebody else's very limited attention is so crazy. Like to be able for somebody to say, I'm going to, out of my busy life with all the stuff that's going on in my life in the world, I'm going to give you my attention. And then you just decide to not show up. It's like making a date with like your best friend. They just don't show up at the restaurant. You'd be like, I mean, at first you might be a little worried, but then you're going to be like, so what? I don't matter. You just don't show up.
Yep. Yeah. Podcasters will avid podcast listeners will actually structure when they're going to listen to their episodes around their day. So they know, all right, that episode drops on Tuesdays. I know exactly when I'm going to listen to that episode. And you have to understand, podcasting, it's not like any other social media. It's not like they are finding you on Instagram or finding you on TikTok and scrolling. You don't have them for 5 seconds. They are literally pressing play and saying, I am committed to the next 30 minutes with you. That is the power you have. So own it. like use it to the best of your ability to communicate what you want to communicate without over communicating what you don't want to need to communicate, which is why we do a lot of that editing down. But being able to really show up, like that's why podcasting is so impactful, and it's not regulated, which, like I said at the beginning, helps with that biases that can come in. No one's telling you can't say that.
That's right.
So say it.
That's right. Exactly. And part of what you're saying is going to be connected to who you are and your core values and what you believe, what your voice is. I always say, I have my name, my reputation, my word, right? In my work ethic, like these are certain things. And it's like, it is not, listen to me going on episode 262, whatever it is. It is not for the faint-hearted, though. It is like, you have to decide. I love, as you can tell, we're going on 2 hours here. I love talking to people. I love telling stories. I love finding out what makes people tick, why they do what they do. Like, I love that. I love helping people. I'm a helper. I can't help it. It's how I am, So being able to have I had a TV show for 13 years though, so I've had the ability to just learn to talk. But I also discovered, Joan Didion, the famous writer, said, I'm paraphrasing, but she says, I write to discover what I actually think. And when you are podcasting and somebody asks you a question and you have to go like, what do I think about that? But when you do mostly solo shows like I do, right? You got to know what you think about a thing. Like I have a note right here that I wrote to myself, like I heard something and I was like, oh, and I wrote down like a bunch of little notes, like, this is what I think about that. And I'm going to talk about that. Right. So I think it's a very powerful medium. And how do you connect it to, because you say here, and again, I printed both your things. I'm trying to read which one to kind of go off of, but you say here, and if it's changed, you said, I work with those who have an established audience that they're looking to connect with in a new way. They don't always know where to start when launching a podcast, and that's where I come in. And you say you help people basically create strategic podcasts that bring leads, land speaking gigs, and connect them with their audience. So if I'm listening to this, how do I know that I'm the right kind of person to work with you? Like when you say they're not brand new, right, to their business or whatever, like just can you give us a few parameters in case somebody doesn't want, because nobody wants to waste your time or theirs, right?
Yeah. So usually they end up being 3 or more years in
their business,
a lot
of whatever.
In their business. Yes. That tends to be the people we work with. We also have worked with people who are, just to kind of say like that helps to people nail down, all right, I fit into this category. But if you have a message that's about making a difference, like we have 2 friends, one is Black, one is white. They've been best friends since they were in college together. They had children while they were older in age. They both got married around the same time, are career women. And they had a great relationship until they became moms. And one had a little Black boy and one had a little white boy. And they had a lot of differing opinions on how they were raising their kids because of this race. And it caused a lot of discussions in their friendship. And they wanted to bring that perspective and that kind of those elements to their audience. So no, they don't have an established audience, but they know what they're talking about. They know exactly what their message is, and they're creating a message that makes a difference for other women.
Powerful. What's the name of that podcast?
It's called Is a Mother.
Is a Mother. Okay, I already like it. I don't even have human kids, and I already like it. This is what I'm talking about. There's a powerful thing there. And, in your listeners, I always say to people, you got to think about it you don't have to, but I encourage you to think about podcasting is one of the most intimate things. You are literally putting your voice, literally 90% of people, probably, I don't know the exact number. I'm kind of pulling that out of my ass, but I would guess that about 90% of people either wear over-the-ear headphones or earbuds in when they're listening to their podcast. Like a lot of people do. So I know some people in their cars, put it over the speaker or whatever, but a lot of people put their earbuds in, go for a walk the dog, do whatever, right? Laundry, whatever they're doing. And it is one of the most intimate things to literally be in somebody's head. And so you're creating a very deep connection. And I know there are people who I have never met before in other countries, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away, who listen to my show. And I think that's like miraculous that somebody found me over there and they think it's worth tuning into and listening. And on some level, they feel like they know me, that if they came up to me, I guarantee you, they would just go in for the hug because they feel like they know me. Because they're like, so many people say to me, I hear you in my head saying, and I sat laughing and I'm like, that's the power of podcasting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's incredible. And I was also, my ears were turning up, and we are going to go, but my ears were turning up too when you were saying, you know, and when I was doing the production stuff, like when I was watching systems and da 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 da, because you've created this process where you say, like, because there are so many moving parts, right?
Yeah.
So many people get the idea or feel like called or whatever to like start a podcast, they get inspired. And then they get bogged down with like the tech and all the stuff and how do I get it out there and how do I do all these things. And you in these previous experiences in your jobs were paying attention to processes and systems and how things do smoothly. So you say here that you've created a system around launches and management so that there's no stress and that shit doesn't fall through the cracks because you and your team handle everything.
Yeah.
You want to say anything more about that? Or
Yeah. So I have a like kind of 5 steps, which I have freebies for this, y'all.
Yeah.
Y'all can go get it. 5 steps to launch a podcast. Now, these are in depth. They take 2 months. It's not a quick get it done and get it out there. These are very.
When you start working with somebody, you mean not the freebies, but like when you start working with somebody, it's a 5-step process and you take everybody through it. I'm hearing.
Yes, but even the freebie I have, it literally is like a workbook where it says, all right, step 1, here's what you need to do. Here's how to do it. Here are some things to consider.
Fantastic.
Step 2, here's what to do. Here's how to do it. Here's some things to consider. And it walks you through everything you need to know to get your podcast out there for the majority part, right? Like it's not going to go through, here's how you submit it to your podcast hosting platform. Like those are things that you're going to have to figure out.
You got to make a living. Yeah, of course.
And then I also have a workflow checklist, which is, okay, your episode, you're ready. You want it to go live. Here's everything from planning to editing to creating to all of the graphics, all of the written content you need for it. Get it out there. And then you also need to market it. So here's a checklist. And it's the same checklist we use for all of our clients.
You're paying clients, yeah?
Yeah. So here's what we need to do for their project. The team knows to go through and check all of those things.
And how many clients are you currently working with, roughly, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah. So we manage anywhere from 10 to 15 weekly shows. So some are bi-weekly, some are every other week, some are every 3 weeks. It really just depends. So anywhere from 10 to 15 we're working on.
And I'm assuming you're taking on new clients right now as well?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We do have capacity.
So how do people get in touch with you? First of all, how do they find those freebies?
Yes. Go to galatimedia.com.
Spell that, please.
Yes, GALATIMEDIA.com. And you will be able to see a resources page that will give you all of those freebies, as well as some of our workshops that we have going on this year. So those will be really good for people. And then if you want to work with us, there's a contact part where you can just submit what you are looking for, what kind of support. We also do strategy. So if you're like, look, I don't know that I can afford you to handle it, but I need help, then we do strategy as well. We have like a micro strategy where it's like me live, listening to your stuff, giving you direct feedback, or something more in depth, which is usually what people end up wanting. Oh my God, now I'm dying in depth.
Oh my God, now I'm dying to know what feedback you would give me. I'm laughing over here. Yeah, because we're in the same, we do samesies different. I'm not on the production side. I'm just on the creative side, but I think that's really fantastic. And to know, because a lot of times what stands between somebody and their dreams is just a lack of skill and a lack of know-how. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you basically help people. Like, again, I cannot tell you how much I look back at that young girl who had no power, but felt like she had no power because you were in situations where you felt powerless, but you were already taking care of business. You were already taking care of other people. You were developing all of these skills. And I really just believe that like now you are living in such a way and helping other people in such a way. And I believe, take this or leave this. You can just be like, you're kooky. No. But I think that this work that you do is helping you to heal each time that you're helping somebody else's voice and you're empowering them. I think those old parts of you get healed through this work that you do. And I think it's, again, I just think it's a beautiful thing. And I love that you're out there doing this and that you're helping people. So tell them about, because I have all your social links. It's all going to be in the show notes, but tell them the name of your current podcast, the one that's live, and where they can find you on social media and stuff.
Yeah, so I have 2 podcasts now, which is crazy to me. I can't believe I did another one. But I've got Listeners to Leads, which Karen was on, and that one episode will go live soon. So be on the lookout for that when this airs. And then that is Listeners to Leads. That has guests where I'm usually talking to podcasters about podcasting. And then I have Successful Podcasting Unlocked. That is a new one, which launched in January. 10 minutes or less answering podcasting questions. So everything from should my podcast have seasons to how the heck do I get my guests to share their episode? All of that stuff, 10 minutes or less. And it's on YouTube as well as on audio and full blog posts as well if you want to read and you don't want to listen or you don't want to watch. So we've got those 2. And then if you want to say hi, I would love to say hi. Instagram is the place that I like to be. Alesia.Galati, Alesia.Galati.
Awesome. That is so fantastic. And is there anything I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about that you wish I had?
No, I think we've covered so much.
Oh, so much. So much.
It's been great.
So thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself and your story, and just like we're comeback kids, man. That's how I see it. We're underdogs, we're underdogs and we're still out here swinging. So I appreciate that. And I really it was such a pleasure to get to talk to you and get to know you a little bit more, and just thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability and sharing your gifts with the world and helping other people to feel empowered and use their voice to make a difference in the world, because we need people who aren't afraid to grab the mic and say what's what, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Say what's on their heart and what's on their mind. So I appreciate you so much. And thank you so much. And listeners, thank you if you're still, look, if you could hear the sound of my voice 2.5 or something hours later, you're the best. I appreciate it. I know Emmeline will listen to the very end. I know she will. But if you're still with us, just thank you so much. And if you want to find out, like if you just want to get this podcast dropped right into your inbox, just join my list. It's KarenKenney.com/sign up. Wicked easy. And remember, wherever you go in the world, may you leave yourself and the people and the place and the animals and the environment better than how you first found it. Wherever you go, may you being there make it better for everyone involved. Wherever you go, may you be a blessing. Bye. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show. I really love spending some time together. Now, if you dig the show or know someone that could benefit from this episode, please share it with them and help me to spread the good word and the love. And if you want to be in the know about all of my upcoming shenanigans, head on over to KarenKenney.com/sign up and join my list. It'll be wicked fun to stay in touch. Bye.